It's getting late, and the Uinta Gardens shopping center is looking like a ghost town. The pharmacy is the last store to lock up.
The store was being closed at 9:45 by the manager, Joe, and Herlinda, who was one of the cashiers.
There was snow outside, and it was cold.
Is that Cynthia's car?
Looks like it.
Cynthia worked the cosmetic counter.
What's she still doing here?
Immediately, this is bad because she checked out 45 minutes before.
The lights were on, and the car was running.
Cynthia?
And the windshield had some ice scraped off.
Where is she?
We just thought that was kind of strange. Why would she leave her car just sitting there running?
Cynthia!
Cynthia?
None of it made any sense at all. The worst thing you could possibly think comes to your mind.
Cynthia!
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 Victim is now disconnected.
3 years later, after a long stint in patrol, Sergeant Joe Kenda has recently returned to homicide, but this time not as a detective.
I returned to homicide as a supervisor. As the boss, you always have feelings about what you'd like to do to improve things, to change things. So I began reviewing unsolved missing persons cases and unsolved homicide cases to determine if there was any possibility they could now be resolved. So there is a reason to continue to pursue. There's no statute of limitations on homicide in the state of Colorado. 50 years ago, you killed somebody. We find you, we're going to lock you up. There is no time element. The long arm of the law, as they say, and it's true.
Hey, Beverly, I need to schedule a meeting. Can you contact everyone in the field and have them here by 12 o'clock sharp? Thanks. Bye. All right, gentlemen, listen up. You guys have done one hell of a job last year closing cases. But this year, I think we can do a little bit better.
When Kenda took over as a sergeant in the Detective Bureau, we welcomed his involvement. He was smart, well-educated, very charismatic.
I want to revisit some of the cold cases that we let slip through. The question is, which ones do we look at? Now, I've got a few thoughts, but I want to hear your ideas.
With my team of homicide detectives, I wanted some unit cohesion, and I was interested in what they thought about everything. Many heads are better than one.
How about you, Lou? Any ideas?
Detective Lou Smith had an instinct for it, unlike any other.
Well, I didn't work it, but how about Cynthia McLuhan? She went missing in '82.
The Cynthia McLuhan case was one we all really wanted to solve.
All right, let's look at the case file.
Though none of Kenda's detectives personally worked the case, they know enough to bring him up to speed.
Cynthia McLuhan. She was 22 years old when she went missing. Coworkers found her abandoned vehicle in the parking lot where she worked.
No evidence in the car and no witnesses.
Okay, then, who'd they talk to first?
The family.
Detectives went to the home of Cynthia's mom,
Oh, thank you.
You're welcome.
which is where Cynthia's living with her daughter, Stacy. And Cynthia's friend, Mary, is there also.
Look, I know this is all very, very shocking, but we need to know more about your daughter if we're going to find her.
Well, Cynthia and Stacy moved in with me recently because money's been a little tight. Cynthia works 2 jobs, and I help out and watch Stacy.
Is she aware of what's going on?
No, not really. She keeps asking for her mama, but I don't know what to say. I keep telling her she'll be home soon.
Cynthia did everything she did for her girl, for her daughter. Her relationship with her daughter was something that was never separable.
What we need to find out is if there was anyone in Cynthia's life that would want to harm her.
The next step would be to determine who does Cynthia associate with. People don't get abducted generally by a stranger.
I don't know.
It was a total mystery. I mean, no idea what had happened. Cynthia really did not have enemies. Can't say that there was really anybody that disliked her.
What about Stacy's father? Where is he?
He and Cynthia were married for a short time, but things didn't work out.
They're curious about someone that had a motive to do her harm. And the first and obvious choice is the ex-husband.
But he lives in Arizona.
Even at the first moment of disappearance, there was never a thought of him doing anything like that.
They talk to him on the phone. He is in Arizona, and he provides an alibi the day she goes missing. He's not part of this.
How about a boyfriend? Was Cynthia seeing anyone that you know of?
Well, recently she's been seeing a guy named Dave.
Dave.
Winfield. Dave Winfield.
And of course, the detectives are immediately interested in David Winfield. Who is he? Did they end their relationship badly?
What do you know about Dave? Is there any issues with him?
I don't know of any issues during the relationship, but I know that Dave was pretty heartbroken when she ended things.
Yeah, that's true.
Good job. What letter is this? No, you don't know? Yeah, sure you do. That's a J. I'll get it. Hello?
Hi, it's me. Listen, can we just talk? I love you. If we could just give it another try.
Dave, we've talked about this, okay?
Cynthia,
No,
you don't
Dave.
understand.
I'm sorry, I gotta go.
Wait.
He would do anything to get her back.
There was concern on the mother's part that the ex-boyfriend might have tried to abduct her, to try to force her into accepting their relationship and going back the way it was.
At that point, detectives focused their attention on 34-year-old Dave Winfield as Cynthia's possible abductor.
Detectives did some digging. They found out that Dave secretly spent some time at the hide and seek.
At the time, the Hide and Seek Lounge was the largest homosexual bar between the Mississippi River and the West Coast.
That information certainly put a different perspective on the case.
So apparently he liked both men and women. I'm sure he didn't want people to know about that.
Right.
In the modern day, homosexuality is universally accepted for the most part. In the 1980s, it was a secret world.
In Colorado Springs, having a gay affair was particularly scandalous. It could hurt you at your job. If you were in the military, it could get you discharged. I mean, the ramifications were huge.
The speculation might have been that Cynthia somehow discovered this, and Dave Winfield was now trying to suppress that information from coming out.
And once Dave found out that we were asking around town about him, he decided to show up at the station.
No kidding.
Did you have anything to do with the disappearance of Cynthia?
I care a lot for Cynthia. I'd never do anything to hurt her.
Did she have any issues with your little trips down to the Hide and Seek Lounge?
What? How do you know about that?
Look, Mr. Winfield, we're not interested in your private life. We're just trying to figure out, perhaps, would that be a problem for Cynthia if she was aware of that?
No. No, okay? Cynthia never knew about that. Even if she did, she wouldn't tell anyone.
So it gives you an insight on Cynthia. She just seemed to be a nice, trustworthy woman.
Did you have an alibi?
Yeah, it checked out.
So Winfield is out. No opportunity.
Okay, so what's next?
It turns out that more evidence surfaced the night that Cynthia disappeared.
Just 2 hours after Cynthia McLuhan vanished from work, a sinister clue was discovered at a nearby motel.
In doing his nightly rounds, a security guard for one of the motels
What the hell?
came across some clothing outside of one of the motel rooms.
The clothing is just dropped, dumped in a pile. And under the clothing is a purse. There are credit cards, there is some money. And it also contains Cynthia McLuhan's Colorado driver's license.
The motel had no record of Cynthia checking in, and when the items were turned in to police, they quickly caught the attention of detectives.
Was the clothing hers?
They matched the description that she was last seen wearing when she left work. But not all of her clothes have been accounted for.
What do you mean?
Her bra and panties were missing.
The clothing that's missing are intimate apparel, so it suggests there may have been some sexual involvement.
When there's evidence of abduction and sexual assault, the end result is never good.
The room where the clothes were found outside of, did we look into who checked into it?
We did. It turns out that the apartment wasn't rented for 1 week.
And nothing materialized from there. Detectives have been all over the area for weeks and didn't turn up any new leads.
When someone goes missing, the more time that passes by, the more difficult things become. You have no place to go and nowhere to find your victim until they are found by someone.
It was a bone-chilling afternoon, 42 days after Cynthia McLuhan disappeared from her workplace.
A 17-year-old named Robert Stockner was jogging through a cemetery in the west side of Colorado Springs.
Fairview is a fascinating cemetery. There are burials there from the very early 1800s. It's a really wonderful, peaceful place, and a lot of notable figures from this area are buried there. So, as Robert went through Fairview Cemetery, he noticed something looked odd. And in fact, as he got closer,
This is no longer a missing persons case. Somebody took her and killed her. We're investigating the disappearance of 22-year-old Cynthia McLuhan. She has been missing for 42 days when her body has been discovered in Fairview Cemetery.
Because it was so cold outside, her body was well preserved.
In cold temperatures, aside from the whiteness of the skin, they look the same as they did when they were alive. Decomposition is advanced greatly by warm temperatures. If you have a body laying outside for 3 days in the summer heat, the body is unrecognizable. You cannot take fingerprints. It's a mess. You have no idea. You can't tell sex, you can't tell age, you can't tell anything.
Canvas of the area turn up anything?
Sort of. We came across a guy who said he saw a dark-colored pickup truck leave the cemetery a few weeks before. So we looked throughout the neighborhood to see if we could find a similar pickup truck.
One of the people that we find who would own that pickup truck is a Richie Hayden. He lived 2.5 blocks from the Fairview Cemetery.
This guy said he was at the cemetery, but he was there because of the great view at Pikes Peak. Sounds a little suspicious, but we couldn't find anything that ties him to Cynthia.
There's nothing about him that alarms them. He has an explanation for his behavior.
Okay, then what?
Nothing.
Case went cold.
They believed it was someone connected to her that hated her for whatever reason, but they could never determine that anybody she'd ever known hated her for any reason at all. So the case sort of dies.
After the notification of finding Cynthia and still no leads, it just went on for a long time, several years, of no information or nothing being said about it. Very, very difficult.
Okay, then. It's time to heat this thing back up.
We all agree that Cynthia McLuhan is an innocent victim. No doubt about it. That inspires us.
John, Lou, I want you to take the lead on this one, but we're all going to be working it with you.
This case had a lot of emotional appeal. Personally, this was one I really wanted to take on.
So the working theory of the case still remains that it's someone she knew. The reason that's true is stranger crimes are rare. They represent less than 5% of all murders.
The first thing we need to do is re-interview the original witnesses and revisit the old leads, starting with the guy with the dark truck. What's his name?
Richie Hayden.
Time has a way of loosening tongues, and every experienced policeman knows it.
All right, Let's go.
I'm thinking we should start with this guy first because he's got a record a mile long, and we're looking for...
Hey.
So Anderson is assigned a lead about Richie Hayden.
Man, Richie Hayden has a sexual assault conviction. It's not all. Got his employment history. Take a guess at where he worked as a dishwasher in 1982.
I'll be damned.
Lo and behold, what does he find? During the time of the crime, he worked at the motel where the clothing was discovered. You don't have to be a mathematician to know that 2 + 2 = 4. So, Mr. Hayden, we need to have an up close and personal with you again. We have reopened the Cynthia McLuhan homicide as a cold case. During the course of that work, we have determined an individual who has some very interesting parts to his life that makes him emerge as a suspect.
Kenda and his team would like to speak with 30-year-old Richie Hayden, but he no longer lives by Fairview Cemetery. In fact, he's now on parole in Wyoming.
So you're saying I'm gonna have to send you to Wyoming?
Maybe before we do that, we see if he's worth our time.
We knew from Cynthia's autopsy that when Cynthia was sexually assaulted, her killer left behind evidence of his own blood type. So we can compare that with the blood type of a potential suspect and eliminate certain people.
The next step in terms of this individual, Mr. Hayden, is to determine what is his blood type.
Why don't you check with the lab and let me know what you find out?
Sure.
So Detective Anderson makes a call to the laboratory and says, what do you know about this guy? Tell me about his blood type. And they tell him that evidence has already been obtained because of the count of sexual assault.
All right, stick out your arm, make a fist.
And as it turns out, his blood type is different than that of the perpetrator of this crime. So despite his truck, despite his criminal record, despite his employment at the hotel, it's not him.
Without a suspect, Kenda and his team begin retracing old steps in hopes of sprouting a new lead.
And one thing we wanted to do was to go back and talk to Cynthia's close friends at the time. One of those was Mary DeDito. She had been at Nancy's house, the mother's house.
Her and Cynthia were best friends.
I assumed that the investigation was over.
No, ma'am. The investigation continues until we find out who's responsible.
Mary, we're wondering if you might remember anything that you might have forgot to mention when Cynthia first went missing.
Well, there is something I probably should have said a long time ago.
Well, if it's something that might help us find Cynthia's killer, I'm sure she would want us to know.
There was a guy that Cynthia was dating that nobody knew about.
Why was it a secret?
He was married.
He's married? Really? Now that's interesting.
I should have said something sooner. I didn't want to say anything in front of Cynthia's mom, and at that point we were hoping she was still alive.
Mary, it's okay.
You got to keep in mind, this was her good friend, and so I understand why she didn't do it at that point.
So who is this guy?
His name's Steve Carlton. She had a second job, and he worked with her there.
You finding everything okay?
I am, but do you have any socks?
Cynthia and Steve Carlton met because he was working as a security guard.
According to Mary, he had told Cynthia that he was getting a divorce. Turned out that wasn't the case.
Cynthia, I'm sorry. All right, I should have told you sooner.
Yeah, you should have, you lying piece of... Now I'm the one who looks like the bad guy. Maybe I should just call your wife and see how she feels about all of this.
Don't you dare, Cynthia!
Sometimes married men want to protect their wife from ever finding out. Murder is one way to do it.
Do you know if Steve still works at the same place?
Not that I know of. I haven't seen him in a while. I just know he was in the Army.
Well, you've been very helpful. Thank you for being honest with us. We'll let ourselves out.
After learning of Steve Carlton, investigators reach out to Fort Carson to see if he has shown up on their radar.
Active military have their own police called the CID, which stands for Criminal Investigation Division. They investigate criminal matters involving active duty military. They have a completely different set of rules as to how they can proceed with their investigations, which my friends and I were always envious of because they cut a lot of corners because they can. So they have a lot of power over these people, much more so than we have in the civilian world. So if they want him, they reach down inside of a tank downrange and pull him out of there by his nose at 1 o'clock in the morning. No questions asked, as they have that kind of authority. So we're talking to them because we know that they can tell us more about this guy than anyone else.
Sergeant Steve Carlton. Where do I remember that name from? It says in '82 he put in a transfer for South Korea.
Really? And what month was that?
Be December.
That was shortly after Cynthia's murder. So our question was he trying to distance himself from this murder?
Was his request granted?
No, it was denied due to poor performance on his part. He's been under investigation multiple times.
And what'd he do?
Sexual misconduct.
Turns out this guy is accused of making obscene phone calls to various women on the base. Further, there's been someone going into the ladies' locker rooms on the post and stealing their underwear.
That's bizarre.
Yeah, you could say that.
All of that sounds like pretty low-level stuff, but many times when you see the path of these predators, it'll start out with that low-level stuff, or that low-level stuff will be going on while bigger things are developing as well. But, you know, I had years ago a detective tell me, don't ever think that a window peeper is just a window peeper. That is usually part of a pattern of behavior that is developing. And so even though it sounds dopey, so this guy's been making nasty phone calls and stealing undies, that's cause for concern.
All right, we're gonna need to speak with Mr. Carlton as soon as possible.
Think I'll make that happen?
Mr. Carlton now emerges. Not only does he have a relationship with our victim, but now we have knowledge that he's potentially involved in sex crimes in the military. That adds up to suspect. So here we have a married man who is dating Cynthia McLuhan. And he's currently under investigation for 2 minor sexual offenses. So let's go find Mr. Carlton and see what he has to say.
Sergeant Carlton, thanks for coming and talk to us.
What's this about? Cynthia McLuhan.
Cynthia? Did you guys find the guy that killed her?
We were told you were having a relationship with her. Is that true?
Yeah, we did.
Mr. Carlton says they became friends, they began to socialize after work on a few occasions, and then they engaged in an extramarital affair.
But we ended it a few weeks before she went missing.
Whose idea was that?
Mine.
Was Cynthia upset about that?
No. I mean, we both knew what we were doing was wrong.
He says he finally decided to break it off because he was afraid his wife would find out.
Okay. Well, we still need to know where you were the night Cynthia disappeared.
I don't know. I don't remember. It was like, what, 3 years ago, man? I didn't even know what was happening until I turned on the news a couple days later.
Most people can't tell you what they had for breakfast the day before. So the fact that he can't remember where he was 3 years ago on a particular evening certainly isn't shocking. Does that make him guilty of anything? No.
You think I killed Cynthia?
We didn't say that. But you were having a secret relationship with her. And we were also made aware of some of the questionable things you did in the past.
Like what?
Some inappropriate acts over at Fort Carson.
Oh, that's garbage. I didn't do any of that stuff.
He vehemently denies both of these crimes. I didn't do it. I never called anybody. I've never been in that locker room.
Look, I didn't kill Cynthia. I didn't have any reason to want to harm her. Once when I found out that she was murdered, I didn't know. She was a good person. I swear on my life, I didn't kill Cynthia.
Steve Carlton claimed he really cared for her, that he wouldn't have killed her. He seemed very believable.
All right, you're free to go. For now.
He is just somebody that we thought was interesting, and we've just lost interest in him.
With yet another suspect out of the running, the investigation begins to lose steam.
Where are we now in this case? Why can't we find a legitimate suspect who has a relationship with our victim?
Same dead end we hit 3 years ago.
Kenda wonders, perhaps he's been going about this the wrong way. Instead of focusing on the victim, what about the crime itself?
In this case, think about it. Abduction from a parking lot, rape, extreme knife violence, the way he positioned the body. I mean, it all seems pretty peculiar.
Sexual criminals commit a crime in precisely the same way on every occasion. These are not isolated incidents. These people tend to commit and reoffend all the time. It's what they do. Their appetite increases for the behavior.
Ken, are you saying you think this is a serial killer?
Well, that's certainly a possibility. But that would mean he's done this before, or at least in the 3 years since. Let me ask you this. Have either of you been involved in a murder like this before? Because I sure haven't.
Me?
No.
What if our guy doesn't have a relationship with our victim? What if our man is a transient? He is a tourist. He's here for a time and then he's gone again. And he is elsewhere doing the same thing. We've never considered it.
Which means if we're going to catch this guy, we're going to need to start looking at similar cases outside of Colorado. Let's go. All right, listen up.
Kenda and his team expand their search to a national scale.
So we've put together a broadcast to all law enforcement agencies in the U.S. describing our crime and asking for similar offenses or similar MOs by perpetrators in their jurisdiction, from huge departments to tiny ones. The national broadcast is out for a while, and we're not getting much results.
Hey, Kenda, I think I've got something here.
But all of a sudden, we do.
It's from Florida.
Lou Smith found a correspondence from a homicide detective in St. Petersburg, Florida, mentioning a James Lamar Rhodes.
The guy's 26 years old. It says here he's raped and attempted murder of 4 different girls with a knife. He's also suspected of 2 full-blown murders. Sound familiar?
Rhodes had abducted 4 young girls in 45 days. One of them sounded remarkably similar to Cynthia's.
Somehow she survived and was able to identify Rose as a suspect, and the physical evidence confirmed it.
He was living in Colorado Springs for approximately 60 days during the time frame that the Cynthia McLuhan case occurred.
So how do we find this guy?
Well, he's currently in Florida prison. He's serving 6 consecutive life sentences for attempted murder.
Looks like we need to go to Florida.
When somebody gives you a series of facts that are so good, that fit perfectly with what you're doing, you can feel it. This is him. There is no doubt in anyone's mind that James Lamar Rhodes is our target. We need to go to Florida and have him tell us that.
Well, the only way to get this sicko is to get a confession from him.
You know, I'm game.
I selected Detective Smith because Smith had a gift. He was the most remarkable interrogator I have ever seen. It was almost as if Lou Smith could walk into a field full of cows and in 15 minutes they'd be offering him free milk.
All right, we need to learn as much as we can about him. Anderson, I want you to lead the research on this guy.
You got it. Let's do this.
It's important when a detective sits down with a suspect that you're armed with as much information as you can.
while Smith is en route to Florida. Kenda's team is preparing background info to pass on to him.
Can you hang on a second? So what do you got from Anderson?
This guy definitely had his issues. We pulled his psychological profile from the state of Florida. It seems he grew up in a dysfunctional family.
Can I call you back? Thanks. Bye.
James Rhodes suffered a great deal of trauma in his growing up. Watching his father beat his mother, he getting beaten up by his mother. In fact, when he would fight, reportedly, when he would fight with some of his peers, his mother would demand that he would win the fight. And if he would not win the fight, when he came back, she would beat him. It was a family full of turmoil, full of violence.
So apparently he had a pretty tumultuous relationship with his mother.
Where the hell are you, James?
As James Rhodes reports, his mother was a brutal woman.
I'm warning you. Get your ass over here.
She would hit him mercilessly and, in fact, encouraged him in many ways to embrace violence.
It seemed he could have harbored hate for women that may have come from his mother.
He was so filled with hate for his mother, he left home when he was 14, and he literally became a drifter.
Looks like Schmidt's gonna have his hands full with this guy.
I'd say.
The following day, Smith arrives at Florida's Cross City Correctional Center to speak with their #1 suspect.
This is Smith's opportunity to work his magic, and he is magical.
Mr. Rhodes, I'd like to thank you for having this meeting with me. I'm Detective Smith.
I understand you want to talk about a case?
Well, actually, James, I really want to talk about you. You see, James, I'm curious as to how you ended up in Colorado a few years back.
No particular reason. I struggled to find work in Texas, so I always loved the mountains. I headed over to Colorado Springs and found a job as a roofer.
I did a little carpentry myself.
Yeah?
Yeah, I was not an expert, but I did some stuff around the house. Made me feel like a man, like I was really in control. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I know what you mean.
Smith knew how to establish rapport with Rhodes. In a very short period of time, they were chatting as if they were lifelong friends.
James, you probably saw a lot of different places when you were a kid, right? Well, I bet that was hard, having to always be responsible for yourself.
You wouldn't know the half of it.
What do you mean?
You wouldn't believe some of the things I've done in the places I've been. Hell, I'd write a book about it if they wouldn't throw me in the electric chair.
All serial killers are narcissists. They like attention. And I think if it were possible, every psychopathic killer would probably write a book, because they would then have a chance to brag about what they did.
And what would you write about during your stay up there in Colorado?
Look, I'd tell you, but I don't want them to fry me.
What if I told you that they won't? Let me make a phone call.
Lou contacted the district attorney's office here, and accepting a plea of first-degree murder on the Cynthia McLuhan case was one that the district attorney was willing to go along with.
Okay, James. DA says he'll take the death penalty off the table.
All right, I'll tell you what happened.
No. I want you to show me.
Smith says, we're going to transport you back to Colorado, and I want you to walk me through this. I want you to show me what you did.
All right. What the hell?
Not 24 hours later, Kenda picks up Smith and Rhodes at the airport, and they set out on their guided tour of murder.
When James Rhodes came back to Colorado, he wanted to show off. He was proud that he could pull this off and to do it well according to his rules. So he was not only showing off when he took the detectives on a tour, he was feeling good about himself, that he did it and had gotten away with it for this long. So he wasn't just going to feel bad he was finally caught. He was going to get one more thrill out of it and show how well he did what he did.
It was right here. I saw her leaving work. Something just came over me.
You didn't know her?
I'd never seen her before.
Now, let's go.
He said he wound up in a cemetery, a secluded area.
Right over here. This is where it was.
It's weird when people confess to crimes. For some reason, they think some details are worse than others. He admits to stabbing her, but he won't talk about the head injury, as if that somehow makes this okay. Who knows? You cannot divine the reasons when a crazy person is describing something they had done as to why he doesn't say certain things. It doesn't make any sense, but nothing he says makes a lot of sense. Because Mr. Rhodes is not exactly normal. You can't expect a normal story from an abnormal person. He left her. He had her clothing in the car, and he thought he had to get rid of that. So he drove by this motel and dumps the clothing in the purse. He has a good memory, and yet he says he doesn't remember certain things, and that's nonsense. He does remember.
All right, let's go.
But for whatever reason, he doesn't want to say it.
The state of Colorado convicts James Rhodes of first-degree murder and sentences him to life in prison. But he won't be serving that time just yet.
Florida has first dibs on this guy, so he goes back to Florida to serve 6 consecutive life terms, and if he survives that, he comes to Colorado to serve yet another one.
Although he's only been convicted of attempted murder in Florida, James Rhodes is suspected of killing up to 10 other young women. However, none of those cases have been proven.
One of the major misconceptions about serial killers is that they are crazy. They are not crazy. They are very disturbed. Their impulses seem to reign freely in a way that's more consistent with a wild animal than a human being.
He was just a monster. How can somebody do the awful things that he did and leave a little girl without her mother?
Cynthia's little girl is now grown. She's had 2 daughters, and if my sister Cynthia was still here, she would be ecstatic being able to see her 2 grandchildren. Still heartbroken because she's not here.
Initially, everyone believed it was someone that Cynthia knew, because that's usually the case. But the reality was that she, unfortunately, breathed the same air as a very rare snake, a serial killer.
The scream is a rumor now, a thin thread stretched across 27 years of silence. But on that night, it was a blade in the dark, a single cut that turned the whole town of Dry Creek toward County Road 6, windows opening, porch lights popping on like warning flares in a sky without a moon. It was late September 1998. Heat still clinging to the asphalt after midnight, cicadas grinding, a storm crouched out on the plains and refusing to move. A pickup idled outside the Lucky Star Diner. Neon fizzed, grease smoke floated. Someone said, "Did you hear that?" Someone else said, "Probably a coyote." And then the sound came again, shorter, strangled, a gasp with edges. It slipped over the fields, slithered down the irrigation ditches, and fell into the parking lot like a coin. The waitress remembered the clock. 12:14 a.m. She wrote it in the back of her order book so she wouldn't forget, because that was the kind of person she was. Another detail, thunder on the wrong side of the horizon. Another, a white Camaro rolling past the diner without headlights, coasting like a ghost saving gas. She didn't know the driver. She'd say that later. Over and over. Didn't know. Didn't see a plate. Didn't see a face. Just the shape of a man at the wheel, shoulders bent forward, as if bracing for something he couldn't stop. A mile up County Road 6, a farmhouse leaned into the wind like it was tired of standing. The paint was a rumor too, a memory of blue. A swing set behind it squealed and swayed. In the kitchen, a coffee mug sat with a ring of cream curdled at the rim. On the fridge, a grocery list: bread, milk, oil change. Over the sink, the window was open, and the screen was sliced. A neat zipper, one quick line. The knife used to do it lay under the mesquite by the back steps, blade sticky with cotton fibers, handle black and clean, like someone had wiped it with a shirt. Her name was Lena, 23. Barista at the new cafe on Main that tried to call itself espresso but was still just coffee to men in boots. Photographer on weekends if people could pay, if the light was good. She had a brother in Lubbock. She had a dog that slept under the bed until the storm got close and then tried to climb inside her chest. She had a habit of leaving the radio on low, a hush of voices, company that didn't talk back. The neighbors would say she was kind. The neighbors would say she was quiet. The neighbors would say she wasn't the kind to make trouble because that's what towns say when they're trying to tell themselves the world is fair. Lena's car was in the drive. Her keys were on the counter in a little dish with a horse painted on it, a chipped horse that still ran. The front door stood half closed, the latch misaligned, the jamb splintered in a way that made the sheriff measure crusted wood with 2 fingers and nod as if nodding were a form of handwriting. In the bedroom, a drawer was open, underwear folded like small secrets. On the floor, a camera, the strap broken, the flash cracked. The roll inside the body was fresh. It would be developed later, and the last frame would be a blur of porch steps and sneakers and the beginning of a shadow. Everything after that would be a blank strip like a closed mouth. The dog had barked, the neighbors said. Then it stopped barking. That's what scared them. Not the noise, but the sudden lack of it, the way silence can be an answer. They walked over with flashlights because that's what you do in a town that still believes in neighbors. They knocked, they called her name. They didn't go inside because the door was ajar, and something about that felt like a line you shouldn't cross. When the sheriff's cruiser finally slid in off the road, tires spitting gravel, the neighbors scattered back to their porches and pretended they hadn't been watching. But they had been. Eyes everywhere. Nobody saw everything. Everyone saw something. That would be the problem. Inside, the sheriff counted steps. He counted scuffs. He crouched and touched a wet ring on the kitchen tile that smelled like oranges and bleach. And then he stood up fast, because the thing coiled in his gut didn't have a name yet, and naming it would make it real. He called for backup he didn't have because Dry Creek's department was 2 deputies and a radio that whined. He called the state police. He called the dog by his name, and the dog crawled out from under the bed, belly low, eyes bright with a fear that made the sheriff look away. There was no body, no blood, just traces and the absence of a woman who should have been there, a woman who had taken her wallet out of her purse and left it on the counter next to a half-eaten slice of peach pie and a note that said, "Call Mrs. D about Saturday, that's all, a domestic map to nowhere." The storm should have broken. It didn't. The sky kept its threat. The search started anyway. Headlights strung like beads down County Road 6. Men with caps. Women with flashlights tucked against their cheeks. The sheriff told them to fan out. He told them to stick to pairs. He told them to watch the fences because men who take women like to take shortcuts, and shortcuts cut the same paths through scrub and barbed wire as deer. They moved, and the grass moved back, and the ditches gulped beams of light and refused to give anything up. Somewhere on the far side of the cotton field, a coyote laughed like it knew a joke nobody else would ever get. The next morning, Lena's mother drove in from San Angelo, hands white on the wheel, a rosary coiled around the gear shift like a snake too tired to strike. She walked the house slow, her palm hovering over the coffee mug, the camera, the broken latch, the dog with his head on his paws. She didn't cry, not yet. She said, "She never left the radio on this station." She said, "This isn't her knife." She said, "Where are her shoes?" And no one could answer because nothing about the scene was messy and everything about it was wrong. Straightened chairs, a dish towel folded once, a door propped open by a book as if to invite the night to sit and listen. The town did what towns do. Baked casseroles, prayed, talked. The diner became a hub, a hive of gossip that tried hard to become intelligence. A man in a seed cap said he'd seen a white Camaro by the old mill around 11:30. A girl said she saw Lena at the gas station at 10, buying windshield fluid and gum. The clerk said she paid cash and made a joke about spark plugs. The sheriff wrote it all down. He drew lines on a map with a pencil that blunted as he drew, and then he sharpened it and drew more lines and tried to make a picture out of threads that wouldn't cooperate. Then the photographs came back, not the ones on the camera. Those were mostly empty frames and smears of motion, a hand, a porch beam, a face if you squinted and wanted a face. The photographs that came back were from the roll in Lena's bathroom, negatives clipped with clothespins over the tub. She'd been shooting the county fair a week earlier, tilt-a-whirl lights, kids with cotton candy, a man at the ring toss, his wrist cocked, a grin snagged on his face like a fish hook. In the background of one shot, the sheriff found a shape that made the room tilt under his boots, a white Camaro by the far fence, headlights off, a dent puckered in the rear quarter panel like a thumbprint. The plate was a reflection, unreadable. But it was there, a ghost sitting in daylight, waiting. The man at the ring toss had a name, Travis Cole, 31 in 1998. Worked odd jobs, sold speakers out of a pickup, drove a car that wasn't his. The sheriff knew him because everybody knew everybody. Travis had charm that curdled when he was bored. He'd been in trouble, but not enough trouble to stick. He'd been questioned once about a girl who left town fast and didn't come back until she was married and strong enough to visit her parents without shaking. Nothing on paper, nothing that held. The sheriff drove out to the trailer park by the river and found Travis on the steps with a beer at 11 in the morning, the can sweating, the man not. He smiled like the sheriff had come to ask about a church raffle. "You know Lena?" the sheriff said. Travis squinted as if the sun were a question he hadn't studied for. "The cafe girl?" "Sure, everyone knows the cafe girl." "Where were you last night?" "Would you believe I was home reading my Bible?" Travis said, and then he laughed at his own joke, but not too much. He scratched his cheek. He looked past the sheriff at the river sliding by like a rumor that didn't care whether you believed it. "The Camaro?" "Borrowed. Week ago. Back now. Don't got it. Ask James. James'll tell you." James did tell him. James said he'd lent Travis the car the week before and gotten it back with a new dent and a smell he didn't have words for. He'd cleaned it with lemon wipes and left the windows open for 2 days, and the smell went away, but the memory didn't. The sheriff asked if anyone else had driven it. James said, "Not that I know." The sheriff asked if he could see the car. James said it was in the shop because the timing belt screamed. The sheriff said he'd wait. James said he didn't know how long it would take. The sheriff said he had time. Days stacked up, then weeks. Posters on poles faded to pale silhouettes where the sun burned faces away. The dog slept by the door and lifted his head for every car that paused at the gate. Lena's mother sat at the kitchen table and wrote her daughter's name over and over in a notebook until the letters lost meaning and turned into shapes, and even the shapes got tired. The sheriff took calls from people who wanted to help and people who wanted to feel helpful and people who wanted to feel important, and he learned fast which category they fit by the way they breathed when he said hello. A trucker called from Abilene to say he'd picked up a girl on the shoulder who looked like Lena, only thinner, only scared, only quiet, and she'd gotten out before he could ask her name. A rancher called to say coyotes had been thick as thieves by the old quarry. A schoolteacher called to say a man had been watching the playground from a car that didn't belong. The sheriff drove. He checked. He got dust in his teeth and road in his bones and came home each night to a house that didn't care that he was tired. He wrote his report, and the report became a diary, and the diary became a story with no ending. Then the river gave something back. October, early morning, fog like gauze. A fisherman snagged what he thought was a tire, cursed and pulled, and the thing bumped the bank with a hollow sound he'd hear again in his dreams. A cooler, white, once, roped shut with nylon line, handle snapped. The sheriff cut it open with a knife from his pocket that had belonged to his father, and inside he found stones, and under the stones he found a bundle wrapped in plastic and tape, and inside the bundle he found hair, long, dark. He stepped back so fast his heel slid in the mud and almost put him down in the water, but he caught himself and he breathed, and he said a name, and the fog didn't answer. The lab worked. The lab was slow. The lab was 3 counties away and backlogged with meth, but it worked. Results came like postcards from faraway places months after the trip. This was human hair. Female. This was a fiber from a car seat that matched a make and model, but not a specific vehicle. This was a trace of bleach. This was algae consistent with the river, but not proof. This was a partial print that smudged itself into uselessness. Lena's mother watched the mailbox like it owed her money. The sheriff stared at the Camaro's dent like it could confess. And then came the footprints nobody could make sense of. A boy riding dirt bikes found them where the scrub meets the wash, half a mile from Lena's back fence. Small, light, bare feet in the dust, 1 set leading out, 2 sets leading back. The boy told his father, the father told the sheriff. The sheriff took casts that cracked in the sun before they cured, and he lined the fragments like puzzle pieces and understood only this. Someone had run. Someone had carried someone else. Someone had come back and taken the path again, slower. Why return? What for? He stood in the heat until it pressed him flat, and still the prince didn't speak. In the cafe, people started using words like taken instead of missing because taken told a story where someone did something, and stories need doers. The pastor preached longer. The bar got louder. The newspaper pressed out a headline with a photo of Lena that made her eyes look too bright, like the flash had found tears and misread them as joy. A whisper shaped itself into a rumor, and the rumor into an accusation, and the accusation into a name. And the name was Travis. because in a town like Dry Creek, a man like Travis is a lighthouse for blame. He didn't hide. He didn't leave. He told jokes. He bought a new shirt. He waved at the sheriff in the produce aisle and said, "Find her yet?" and smiled like a man who trusted lightning not to strike him because it never had before. The months slid. Winter put a thin edge on the mornings and then backed away. Every anniversary is a knife. The first year cut, the second sawed, the third went quiet in a way that scared people more than the noise had. The case got a box. The box got a shelf. The shelf got dust. But inside the dust, in the air that the night held and the day ignored, the scream kept its shape, a sound you could almost hear if you turned your head at the right angle when the storm sat on the horizon and refused to move. And if you want to know how a town holds its breath for decades, you start with this: a white Camaro without headlights, a kitchen radio whispering to no one, a dog that went quiet because he understood what the humans didn't, and a river that kept too many secrets until it couldn't anymore. You start with a mother who learned the names of investigators like saints and pinned hope to them like medals. You start with a sheriff who kept a photo in his wallet that he looked at on nights when the sky pressed down and the porch lights winked like exhausted stars. You start with the first hint that a cold case isn't a tomb but a door, and somewhere in the dark someone's hand is still on the knob. The second hand of the clock in the sheriff's office barely moved that winter. Time crawled the way a wounded animal drags itself toward cover, slow, leaving traces of itself everywhere. County files piled up like sediment, each one labeled unsolved, each one another stone on the chest of a man who had once believed in closure. But this case, Lena's case, it didn't sleep. It waited. It whispered through the radio when the static was low. It rode the wind through the mesquite. It echoed in every late-night knock on the door that never came with good news. The sheriff, Malcolm Drew, was 53 and felt older. He kept the photo on his desk, the one taken at the county fair, Lena laughing at something just off frame, the background already fading like a prophecy. Behind her, the white Camaro glinted under the halogen glare, the reflection of something metallic inside the windshield, like a shape of a hand holding something. The lab couldn't enhance it. The image was too soft. But Malcolm knew what it looked like to him, a camera pointed back. Months after the river gave up its secret, Travis Cole left town, quietly, like smoke slipping out a cracked window. The trailer park manager said he owed 2 weeks' rent. The neighbor said he heard an engine turn over at 3 a.m. The clerk at the gas station swore she saw him buy a map. Real paper, not digital, old-fashioned. The kind truckers still trust. Nobody saw him again. But 2 days later, Malcolm got a postcard. No return address, no handwriting. Just the picture of a desert road stretching straight into nothing. And on the back, stamped letters from a typewriter. "You're looking the wrong way." They checked the postmark, Albuquerque, but that didn't help. The trail went cold. 20 years slid by. Dry Creek grew up and grew over its memory. The diner changed names twice. The sheriff retired. His badge hung in a glass frame in the station lobby, dulled by sunlight, polished only when the new recruits felt sentimental. The house on County Road 6 fell apart one nail at a time. The porch collapsed, the roof caved, and weeds climbed the steps like uninvited mourners. Lena's mother moved into a care home by the state line where the nurses played country music and spoke in voices too soft for the ghosts that followed her in. Every now and then, she'd wake in the dark and ask, "Is she back?" And nobody answered, because they didn't know who she meant anymore, her daughter or her own mind. Then in 2021, the Texas Rangers reopened the file. Not because of new leads, there weren't any, but because of new tools. DNA didn't lie anymore. It whispered back. The unit called Cold Track had started scanning unsolved cases, digitizing the old yellowed evidence logs. That's when they found it. A single hair, bagged in 99, mislabeled control sample dog, but it wasn't canine. Under the scope, it sang human. Detective Anna Rivas took the call. 36, relentless, fluent in silence. She'd joined the Rangers after her own sister went missing at 16. Never found, never named in the papers. Cold cases were her religion, truth her punishment. When the lab called, she drove 3 hours through rain just to watch the sequence upload in person. STR match search, partial hit. A male profile registered in the state database from a DUI in 07. Name Travis Cole. The ping was weak, degraded, but the math was clear. 97% probability after 23 years the dead file exhaled. Rivas didn't smile. She just whispered, "Finally." Then she called the sheriff's old number, the one that still worked somehow, and left a message that cracked like thunder through the static. "We found something. You were right." Malcolm didn't call back that night. He sat on his porch, listening to the locusts, the hum of power lines, the ghosts of engines. He poured a drink, looked at the stars, and said her name aloud for the first time in a decade. Lena. It felt like lifting a stone from a grave. The next morning, he drove to town. His badge stayed in the frame. He went as a man, not as a sheriff. The investigation reopened like an old wound. The Camaro was gone, sold for scrap years ago, crushed into silence. But the registry showed it had passed through a salvage yard outside Amarillo. Rivas and Malcolm went there. The yard was a graveyard of machines, rusted trucks, tractors with bullet holes, the smell of oil thick as confession. The owner, a man with sunburned hands and cataract eyes, checked the log. White Chevy Camaro came in June 2001, he said. Didn't crush it right away. Body was stripped first. He led them to the far end of the yard, to a heap of twisted metal that had forgotten what it once was. The chassis number matched. On the passenger side, where the seat once bolted down, they found a dark smear. Invisible to the eye, but under blue light, it bloomed. DNA confirmed it 2 weeks later. Human, female, a match to the river hare. Lena's. The news hit Dry Creek like a storm that had been waiting years to break. Headlines rolled through the state. Texas 1998 cold case solved. Suspect's DNA links to missing woman. Old neighbors gathered at the diner, whispering names they hadn't dared say in years. The waitress, now gray-haired, still keeping notes in the same kind of book, cried quietly over the coffee urn. But Rivas wasn't done. The DNA proved Lena had been in that car, not what happened after. Travis Cole was still just a ghost with an address in the wind. She pulled every trace she could, old arrest records, job applications, phone numbers, then something strange. In 2011, a man named T. Cole had applied for a construction permit in Santa Fe, New Mexico. The address was fake, but the signature matched. A hard loop on the C, a downward slash like a scar. Rivas checked nearby utilities. Someone had been paying electric bills under that same name until 2019. Malcolm stared at the screen, his reflection flickering in the monitor light. "He's still out there," he said. "Maybe," Rivas replied, "or maybe he never left." They went back to Dry Creek, to the farmhouse. The property had been abandoned for years, but it still stood, bones of wood and memory. Rivas ducked under the police tape that the wind had turned to ribbons. Inside, the air was thick with dust and old paper. The floor groaned like something alive. The kitchen hadn't changed much. The same counter, the same space where the mug once sat. The sheriff's old chalk marks were still faint on the tiles. Rivas ran her gloved fingers along the wall, tracing patterns invisible to sight. Then she stopped. Behind the fridge, a patch of plaster looked wrong. Not older, but newer. Someone had patched it up, sloppy, uneven. She took a pocket knife and pried. The plaster fell away easy, soft as chalk. Inside, wedged in the hollow between studs, was a strip of Polaroids. 11 of them. Each showed the same angle. The porch steps at night, a figure standing at the bottom, blurred by motion. The last one showed a hand reaching for the camera. The timestamp, September 24th, 1998, 11:59 p.m. Someone was taking pictures that night, Rivas said quietly. Malcolm swallowed hard. Not someone. Her. That's her camera strap we found. Rivas looked closer. In the reflection of the window, on the last photo, faint but there, was the outline of a man's face. Narrow eyes, hat brim, a scar down the chin. It was him. Travis Cole. The prints were sent to the lab, and the match came back with 99.8% certainty. The man in the photo was the same one whose DNA had been found in the Camaro. But there was something else. The negatives contained chemical residues that didn't match 1990s film stock. The compounds were newer, reprints developed years later. Someone had handled the photos, retouched them, maybe even re-photographed the originals. "Why hide them here?" Malcolm asked. Rivas shook her head. Maybe someone wanted them found, but not too soon. That night, as they left the farmhouse, the sky tore open with thunder, the first storm in months. The wind pressed against the grass like a hand over a secret. Rivas turned once more to the empty windows, to the house that had held its silence for more than 2 decades. "Do you hear that?" she said. Malcolm listened. The sound of rain, the creak of old wood, the low hum of power in the lines. "Yeah," he said softly, "I hear her." The storm swallowed their voices, and somewhere out beyond the highway where the land flattens into memory, a camera flash blinked once in the dark, like an eye opening after too long a sleep. The storm that night tore through Dry Creek like something alive, ripping tin from rooftops, bending the old pecan trees until they screamed. Rain hammered the abandoned house, drumming on the porch where Lena had once stood. Lightning crawled across the sky in veins of white, lighting the fields in flashes, and for the first time in decades, people said the wind sounded like her voice calling out from the dark. By morning, the road to County 6 was washed out and the farmhouse was half collapsed. The roof caved over the kitchen, the old fridge tipped onto its side. But inside the wreckage, the storm had revealed something no one expected. Rivas was first on scene, rain jacket plastered to her shoulders, flashlight trembling in her grip. The plaster wall where the Polaroids had been hidden was gone now, torn clean by the water. Beneath it, in the hollow of the wall cavity, she saw the edge of something metallic. Dull, rectangular, rust-bitten. She reached in, fingers slipping through wet dust, and pulled out an old lockbox, the kind with a cheap keyhole and a promise it couldn't keep. The lid was fused shut by time. She handed it to Malcolm, who stared at it as if it might breathe. "Don't open it here," he said quietly. "Not yet." They took it back to the station. The box was stamped with a sticker half peeled from the lid. First National Bank of Dry Creek. A tag on the side read LC98. Malcolm didn't need to ask what those letters stood for. When the latch finally gave way, the air that came out smelled like mold and paper and something older, the scent of memory rotting slow. Inside were cassette tapes, labeled in black marker. 9/18/98, 9/19/98, 9/22/98, and one marked only with an X. Alongside them were film negatives, a driver's license, Lena's, and a Polaroid of Travis Cole leaning against his Camaro, middle finger raised at the camera, a smirk carved deep into his face. Rivas looked up. Who took this? Malcolm's jaw set tight. Maybe her, maybe him. They didn't have a working tape deck in the building anymore, so they drove one over from evidence storage, the kind they used to record interviews back in the 90s. When the reels began to spin, the sound was faint, crackling through static like voices calling from underwater. Tape 1, 9/18/98. Lena's voice, soft, close to the mic. "He came by again, the one with the car. Said he could help with the photo project. He laughs too long, smells like gasoline." A pause, then, "I told him I don't need help." Tape 3, 9/22/98. Wind, a dog barking. Lena again. "He left something on the porch. I didn't touch it, just took a picture. Maybe I'll give it to Malcolm if he comes in for coffee. He still drinks black, no sugar, says sweet makes him slow." A long silence. Then, "Someone's walking outside." Tape ends. The final tape, the one marked X, was different. No wind, no voice, just a low humming sound, steady, mechanical, like a camera motor winding. Then footsteps, then a door creaking open, then, faint, a single word, "Smile." Then a click, and the tape snapped. Rivas stopped it, hands shaking just enough to make the reels wobble. Malcolm's face was stone, but his eyes were somewhere far away, back in that night in that house, hearing the scream again. "That word," he said slowly. "That's what he said to her at the fair. I heard it, right before she took that last picture." The lab confirmed the obvious. The voice belonged to a male, mid-30s Texan accent. No exact match, but the cadence was right. Travis Cole. But something about the tapes didn't add up. The time codes jumped. The audio degraded unevenly, as if parts had been copied, not recorded. Rivas ran them through digital restoration. Hidden under the hiss, she found another layer of sound. Faint music, old country, a radio playing in the background. The song, "Blue Eyes Crying in the Rain." The same song that had been playing on Lena's kitchen radio when they found it all those years ago. "Someone spliced these together," she said. "Someone wanted to make it sound like she was recording right before it happened, but parts of this are from later, maybe days later." "Which means," Malcolm said, "she was still alive." The words hit like a gunshot in a silent room. They rechecked the timeline. If the last recording was after the night she vanished, someone had taken her and stayed close enough to use her voice, her equipment. Rivas pulled the traffic logs from 1998, looking for any unaccounted cars traveling between Dry Creek and the next county. Nothing. Then she checked the emergency call records, wrong numbers, abandoned lines, hang-ups. On September 25th at 2:04 a.m., there had been one such call from a payphone outside a truck stop in Abilene. 3 seconds of silence, then static, then the faint sound of a dog barking. Malcolm's heart stopped. "That's her dog. That's Chester." "Could it be coincidence?" Rivas asked. "No," he said. "That's the sound I heard when I walked into that house." They traced the payphone. It had been demolished years ago, but the security records from the truck stop, miraculously, still existed on a digitized archive. The grainy black and white footage showed the payphone, the pumps, and the night clerk sweeping the floor. At 2:03 a.m., a car rolled up behind the pumps. 2 figures inside, headlights off. It was the Camaro. The timestamp matched the call. But the part that stopped Rivas cold was the frame at 2:05. The driver getting out to pump gas, turning toward the camera for a second. His face was blurred by motion, but his clothes, denim jacket, trucker cap, matched Travis Cole. The passenger side window was rolled halfway down. Through the reflection, a faint outline of another figure, smaller, hair hanging forward, head turned toward the phone booth. "Lena. She was alive," Rivas whispered. "That's her. That's her trying to call for help." Malcolm leaned back, hands covering his face, and nobody picked up. The footage ended there. The car pulled away, merging with the night. That was the last time anyone ever saw her. They released the footage to the press, and the story went national. The Ghost of Dry Creek, they called it. Viewers froze the image, magnified it, swore they could see her eyes in the glass. Conspiracy blogs lit up, claiming Travis had ties to interstate truck stops, that he'd crossed into New Mexico, maybe Arizona, maybe Mexico itself. But Rivas didn't care about the noise. She followed the trail. In March 2022, she got a lead, an abandoned storage unit in Santa Fe, registered to a Thomas Cole. The rent hadn't been paid in 4 years. The lock had been cut. Inside were boxes of old photographs, development trays, and chemicals. In the corner, a wall covered with pinned Polaroids, all of them the same woman, all of them Lena. Some smiling, some blurred, some with her eyes closed. And one, at the center, perfectly clear. Lena, hands tied, sitting in the passenger seat of the Camaro, staring straight into the lens. Pinned next to it, written in marker, she smiled for me. Rivas called it in. Sirens flooded the block, but the rest of the unit was empty. No fingerprints, no DNA, nothing but the ghosts of photographs and a faint smell of bleach. Whoever had been there had left years ago and left nothing that could speak. Malcolm stood in the doorway of that storage unit as the lights flickered over the wall of faces. Hundreds of Lenas looking back at him, frozen in time, caught between fear and defiance. His voice cracked for the first time in years. "She was right there," he said. "All this time, she never left." Rivas touched the corner of the central photo, the one where Lena's eyes seemed almost alive, almost pleading. He wanted her to last forever, she said, and in his way, he got what he wanted. Outside, the desert wind screamed through the alleys, scattering dust like ashes, and somewhere beyond the city, beyond the line of storm clouds curling in the horizon, a white Camaro waited in a scrapyard, quiet, rusting, its doors sealed by time, the last witness to a night that refused to die. The photographs from the Santa Fe storage unit filled 3 evidence tables, rows of Polaroids, negatives, and contact sheets, all numbered, logged, cataloged, 231 in total. Every one of them featured Lena, same face, same light, same fear, frozen mid-breath. Forensics called it a timeline of obsession. Rivas called it his shrine. Malcolm called it hell made of film. They worked in silence. The air in the evidence room smelled of chemicals and old paper. Each photograph hissed faintly when handled, static crackling like whispers from the past. Some shots were clearly taken in '98, Lena's hair shorter, the same blue dress from her cafe uniform. Others showed her thinner, older, her eyes duller, the dates stamped months apart, and then impossibly one dated 2001. Impossible, said the lab tech. She'd been gone 3 years. But the timestamp was right. The film stock was from that year. The dust on it matched the New Mexico desert, not Texas. The conclusion settled like smoke. She hadn't died in Dry Creek, not that night. Travis had taken her, kept her, moved her. Malcolm left the room. He needed air. He leaned against the wall outside, hands shaking, heart knocking like a door in wind. For 23 years, he'd pictured her death as quick, a single night, one scream, darkness. Now the idea of her surviving made it worse. Suffering stretched out over years, the kind of cruelty that had no purpose except to last. Rivas joined him in the hall, a paper cup of bad coffee in hand. "We'll find him," she said. Malcolm looked at her. "You ever find someone like him?" She didn't answer. She didn't need to. The silence was enough. They traced the chemicals found in the storage unit, sodium sulfite, hydroquinone, fixer. All common, but one stood out, a rare stabilizer used in professional darkrooms, purchased through a company in Albuquerque that kept meticulous customer records. Only 6 people had ordered that blend in the early 2000s. One of them, Thomas Cole. Address, a P.O. box in the town of Truth or Consequences, New Mexico. Rivas and Malcolm drove out before dawn. The highway stretched endless, ribboned with mirage. The town's name sat on a faded green sign at the edge of the desert, half joke, half prophecy. Population 5,912. The gas station clerk knew the name. "Cole," he said. Tall guy, drove a beat-up Dodge, used to sell old cameras at the flea market. Haven't seen him in years. He liked the heat, said the desert doesn't ask questions. The P.O. box had been closed since 2019. Mail still piled in the back, flyers, bills, a single envelope without a stamp. Inside, a Polaroid, overexposed almost to white, but faintly visible in the burn of the light, a figure standing in a doorway, hand raised, palm open. The word "sorry" written beneath in blue pen. The postmark read 2019, 21 years after she vanished. Rivas held it under the desk lamp, turning it, angling it. "If this was sent from here," she said, "who was it meant for?" Malcolm stared at the empty 2 line. "Maybe not for us," he said. "Maybe for her mother." They checked the care home. Lena's mother had died the year before. Among her belongings, tucked inside a Bible, was a small brown envelope, postmarked the same week as the one in the box. Inside, another photograph, this one clearer. The desert. A fence. A woman standing at a distance, too far to see her face, but her posture, head tilted, arms crossed, was familiar enough to make Malcolm's throat close. Rivas enlarged it digitally. The grain resolved into pixels and pixels into shapes. A scar on the left wrist. Lena had burned herself on a coffee pot once. He remembered the mark. The lab dated the photo paper manufactured 2018, so she'd lived somehow, somewhere, 2 decades after the night the world buried her name. Rivas whispered, "Then what happened to her after that?" They spent days tracing any record, hospital visits, aliases, shelters, witness statements, nothing. Lena had become a ghost that sometimes walked through paper, leaving only light and shadow behind. Then, an alert hit the system. Santa Fe police had arrested a transient man for assault, no ID, no address. His fingerprints triggered a dormant match, partial prints from the Camaro's trunk latch. The name he gave them was fake, but the DNA didn't lie. Travis Cole. They found him in the hospital wing of the county jail, dehydrated, gaunt, his once sharp face caved into bone and leather. When Rivas and Malcolm entered the room, he smiled, as if they were old friends finally keeping a promise. "You took your time," he rasped. Rivas set a recorder on the table. "Tell us where she is." He laughed, dry, hollow. "Which one?" Malcolm slammed his palm down. "Lena Carter, where is she?" Cole blinked slow, eyes like dust. "She left me," he said. "Years ago. Always said she would." "She's dead then?" He shook his head. "No, she learned the trick." Rivas frowned. "What trick?" Cole leaned forward, chains clinking. "To disappear without dying. I taught her that. She was good at it. Better than me." He turned his wrists, showing faded scars that ran lengthwise, deliberate. "You think I'm the monster, Sheriff? I kept her alive. The world kills people like her. I saved her from it." Malcolm's voice cracked. "You took her life." Cole smiled again, the kind of smile that didn't belong to the living. "She took mine first." He refused to speak after that. He wouldn't eat, wouldn't sleep. 3 nights later, he was found in his cell, hanging from a bedsheet, mouth open in a silent laugh. On the wall beside him, scratched into concrete with something sharp, were 3 words: "She's not gone." Rivas sat in the motel room that night, the rain whispering against the window, replaying the interview again and again. Each word twisted, echoed, rearranged in her mind. "She's not gone. Learned the trick." What trick? She opened her laptop and cross-referenced every missing person report from 2001 to 2020, involving women resembling Lena. Dozens popped up, some found, most not, but one stood out. Phoenix, 2012, a woman rescued from an abandoned motel fire, severe burns, no ID, claimed her name was Ellie Carter, no match in any database, vanished from the hospital before sunrise, left behind only one thing: a camera. Rivas pulled up the evidence photo, a 35mm Minolta melted around the edges, film inside fused but intact enough to scan. The first frame showed smoke, the second, an open desert highway, the third, a man's shadow on the sand. The fourth, a mirror, cracked down the center, reflecting a woman's face half hidden by bandages. And taped to the back of the camera, scrawled in faded ink, were 3 words: "Smile for me." Rivas stared until the letters blurred. Malcolm said nothing. There was nothing left to say. Outside, lightning flashed once across the desert horizon, bright white, merciless. The storm was returning, and somewhere out there, beneath the thunder and the dust, a woman named Lena, or Ellie, or neither, was still walking the long road between the living and the dead. The desert keeps its dead differently. In Texas, the earth swallows them, folds them under soil and grass. But out here, in New Mexico, Arizona, the long, heat-shattered nowhere, the sun does the burying. It bleaches everything until truth and bone look the same. When the call came in, it was 2:37 a.m. A rancher outside Lordsburg reported a burned-out pickup near the rail tracks. No plates, no driver, just the smell of melted plastic and something that wasn't fuel. Rivas drove through the night to get there. The moon hung low, fat and red, and the air trembled with heat even at dawn. The truck was a late 90s Dodge, same model Travis Cole had been seen driving. Inside, the upholstery was blackened, the steering wheel half melted, but the glove box had survived. Rivas pried it open and found a Polaroid, its edges curled from heat. The image was warped, but the subject clear. A motel sign flickering in the dark. Sunset Haven, vacancy. In the corner of the photo, faint but visible, a hand, small, feminine, holding the camera. The fire marshal said the ignition point was deliberate. Gasoline poured under the chassis, lit from the driver's side. Somebody wanted this gone, he said, but not before leaving a message. That motel, Sunset Haven, sat 20 miles east, half buried in sand and neglect. Closed since 2013 after a kitchen fire gutted half its rooms. The sheriff's office had boarded it up, but people still came. Drifters, addicts, ghosts. The paint peeled like dry skin. The sign still buzzed when the wind hit right. Rivas and Malcolm arrived just after sunrise. The air smelled of rust and heat. Desert flowers cracked underfoot. The front door was locked from the outside. She broke it with a crowbar, and the sound echoed down the empty halls like a gunshot. Inside, dust, bird nests, burned carpet. And on the wall behind the front desk, something new. Someone had scrawled words in black marker over the old wallpaper. "Smile, she's home." Malcolm's hand twitched toward his gun, though the room was silent. "We need to clear every floor," he said. They split up. Rivas moved through the halls, flashlight cutting through the gloom. Each room told a story: a burned mattress, a cracked mirror, a Bible fused to the nightstand by melted varnish, and in one, room 9, she found it. A camera tripod, still standing, its legs rusted but stable. On the floor beneath it, a ring of ash shaped like a body had lain there too long. Next to it, a Polaroid pinned to the wall with a nail. It showed the same room, before the fire. A woman sitting on the bed, hair long, dark, eyes swollen. She was looking straight into the lens. Under the photo, written in the same handwriting as the storage unit, the last one's always the hardest to keep. Malcolm's voice came through the radio, low and ragged. "Rivas, you better come see this." He was in the lobby, standing beside the front desk. He'd pulled a drawer open, and inside was a keychain, faded leather, stamped initials, LC. "Lena Carter," he said quietly. They bagged it, photographed everything, but the motel felt alive, humming beneath the silence. Rivas turned toward the hallway mirror, its glass blistered from the heat. And for a moment, just a blink, she thought she saw movement behind her reflection. A shadow crossing the doorway. She spun around. Nothing. Just the low wind outside, brushing through broken blinds. Forensics later confirmed it. The Polaroid in the truck, the handwriting in the motel, and the camera tripod all carried the same partial print, Travis Cole's right thumb, which should have been impossible. He'd been dead 2 months. Malcolm said what they both thought. Someone's still following his script. The theory was madness, but it made sense. The photos from the storage unit, the identical handwriting, the messages echoing his words. Someone was keeping him alive, or continuing what he started. Rivas went back through Cole's possessions, digging for patterns, receipts, phone numbers, names. One thing stood out, a list of female aliases, each paired with a location: Maria, Tucson; Ellie, Phoenix; June, Santa Fe. At the bottom, one more: E. Carter, Haven. "Haven," she murmured. The motel, Sunset Haven. The handwriting looked older, weaker, maybe written during his final months. Maybe after he'd already lost track of what was real. Malcolm stared at it for a long time. "You think she was there too?" Rivas nodded slowly. "Or she went back." That night, Rivas drove alone. The desert was a black ocean, the sky crushed with stars. She parked near the motel's remains, turned off the lights, and waited. Midnight, 1, 2. The wind died, the air went still, and then, faintly, a flicker. One light, from inside room 9. She stepped out, gun drawn, heartbeat synced with her footsteps. The air was electric. Sand whispered across the asphalt. The motel door hung half open, creaking in rhythm with her pulse. She entered. The smell hit her first. Not rot, not smoke, but something metallic, sharp. The light came from an old lamp in the corner, plugged into an outlet that shouldn't have had power. On the bed sat a small box, covered in dust. A camera flash cable ran from it to the wall. She lifted the lid. Inside, Polaroids. Fresh ones. Each showed the same scene. This very room, moments apart. The bed, the door, the corner where she now stood. In the last frame, she saw herself, standing by the door, flashlight raised, looking directly at the camera. Her stomach dropped. The photo had been taken seconds ago. She turned toward the wall. Click. A blinding flash. The camera, hidden behind a cracked mirror, went off again, then again. The shutters rapid, mechanical, hungry. She tore it down, wires snapping like tendons. The flash died, the light collapsed, and the room fell back into darkness. Her radio crackled, static, then Malcolm's voice, urgent. "Rivas, where are you?" "Room 9, she whispered. "He's been watching." The line cut. She stepped backward toward the hall. The air felt heavier now, thick with heat and dust. The silence had changed shape, turned from emptiness to presence. Something in the shadows shifted. She aimed her light. A figure stood at the end of the corridor, thin, motionless, face hidden by long, dark hair. Lena. The shape tilted its head, then it moved, slowly at first, then faster, too fast, until the beam of her flashlight caught the eyes, black and glassy like film, and before Rivas could raise her weapon, the power cut completely. The world went black. Outside, the motel sign buzzed to life. Sunset Haven. Vacancy. It blinked over and over until the desert swallowed the light again. When backup arrived 20 minutes later, room 9 was empty. The camera was gone. The fresh Polaroids, too. Only one thing remained, sitting on the bed where the box had been. A note written in trembling blue ink. "You're looking the wrong way." The same words Travis had mailed the sheriff 20 years earlier, and taped to the bottom of the note. A new Polaroid. Detective Rivas, asleep in her car outside the motel, taken from inside. The note sat on the evidence table like a shard of ice. You're looking the wrong way. The same taunt from 1998, resurrected in shaky blue ink. Rivas didn't blink. She stared until the letters stopped being letters and turned into grooves gouged by a hand that didn't want to write them in the first place. The Polaroid taped underneath, her asleep in the driver's seat, mouth half open, collar turned up against the high desert chill, refused to give up a reflection of the photographer. No silhouette in the glass, no shadow in the dashboard, no hand in the frame. Whoever pressed the shutter had learned the angles. Malcolm paced, boots ticking on tile. He's dead. His print shows up after the grave, so either there's a second man, or the second man is a myth, Rivas said. A mask, a script somebody else is reading. Her? The word broke out of him before he could sand it down. Rivas didn't answer. She slid the Polaroid under the lamp. The borders looked clean, no grease, no smears. But near the bottom edge, the white lip had a faint abrasion like gravel had chewed it. She turned to the motel, shot from the burned Dodge. Same scar on the border, same grit ground into the paper. 2 different photos, same road dust stamped into their bones. The camera moved, she murmured, but the hands didn't. The lab called with crumbs. The ink on the note was cheap ballpoint, the kind chained to counters in truck stop lobbies. The paper fiber matched generic motel stationery from the 2000s. The half print on the corner, useless swirl, shallow, childish pressure. A glove finger rubbed over nothing. The only thing with teeth was the adhesive strip on the back of the Polaroid. The glue had captured a whisper of fabric, microfibers tinted with indigo. Denim. You can buy denim in every town on Earth, Malcolm said. Not this denim, the tech replied. Hand-dyed, indigo that breaks toward violet under UV. Domestic craft batch, Southwest Supply, mid-2010s. Rivas thought of the storage unit wall, the careful pins, the reprinted negatives. Someone who understood chemicals, who understood patience, someone who knew how to look at time and make it stand still. She learned the trick. She went back to the motel alone at noon, when heat laid on the world like a hand. Room 9 had been taped, dusted, mapped, bagged. But heat has a memory that prints itself in air. She stood where the box had sat, where the tripod had bitten little circles into the carpet, and she looked away from where any sane person would look. She looked up. The ceiling was a mosaic of smoke stains, but in the corner, above the cracked mirror, a square lighter than the rest. Someone had once mounted a small bracket there, later removed. Tiny screws, heads stripped, ringed by soot halos. A ceiling camera, too high for an ordinary frame, positioned to swallow the entire door and half the bed with each blink. She measured the sight line and stepped backward into it. The view held the door, the hallway, where she had seen the figure, and the slice of wall where the note had been. Whoever watched her had been 2 steps ahead, not tucked in the room, not in the corridor, but outside with a remote trigger and a line of sight through the narrow gap in the blinds, not a ghost, a geometry. She crossed the asphalt. The sand had combed itself smooth since the night's wind, but in the strip of shade beneath the ice machine cage, a pair of prints still clung, narrow, deep at the heel, shallow at the toe. The pattern was a long-ago brand of hiking boot, women's, size small. One print overlapped with the ghost of another shoe, a man's, older, the rubber gone to slick, a duet fossilized in heat. Rivas crouched and closed her eyes. Wind, distant highway, a hawk writing its name in the sky. In the mirror behind her, a camera that had learned to see better than any human. In the shade at her feet, a woman who had learned to move the way a photograph moves, sideways through time. Back at the station, she put the motel photographs and the storage unit photographs side by side and watched for error. An amateur imitator slipped somewhere, light angle, framing, the lazy mistake of the ego. These did not. The horizon was always corrected, the flash never flared. When a reflection threatened to show a face, an object intervened, a hanging tarp, a door edge, a slat of blind. That wasn't a man's arrogance. That was a survivor's caution. Look at the text, she said. She spread the notes. Smile for me. She's home. You're looking the wrong way. The loops on the Ys had changed. In '98, they hooked up, high and mean. In 2019, they fell low, pinched closed, like someone guarding a secret even from themselves. Handwriting degrades with time, with injury, with scar tissue. It also changes when you teach yourself to write with the other hand. Malcolm went very still. Left-handed. She burned her right in that Phoenix fire, Rivas said. Frame 4. The bandage. So she wrote these, he said softly, as if speaking louder would break the thought. She wrote them, knowing we'd think he did. Or she wrote them, knowing I'd think she did, Rivas said, and still follow. They mapped the sightings, the photos, the postmarks. The constellation stretched from Dry Creek to Santa Fe to the line of desert towns that fed on travelers and spat out names. At the center of the map was a circle where nothing lay, no major road, no water, no town. just a dry salt pan and an abandoned drive-in from the 80s where the screen still stood, white and toothy, biting at the sky. They drove there at dusk. The screen's frame cut a ribcage into the heavens. The projector booth was a concrete box scabbed with graffiti, the door peeled like a can. Inside, the room held shadows that had learned to sit very still. A table, a red bulb on a gooseneck, an enlarger that had been wiped, then wiped again. In the sink, a darkroom tray still tacky. A strand of hair clung to the drain curve, dark, human. The bulb flicked on by itself. Rivas didn't flinch. Motion sensor, old and hungry. The red wash turned the room into a submarine. On the back wall, hundreds of push-pin holes made a constellation of nothing. A panel of plywood leaned against the far corner. She lifted it and found the new shrine. Not Lena this time. Her. Rows of 4x6 prints carried from a phone to a drugstore kiosk. Rivas on courthouse steps. Rivas at a gas station. Rivas in a motel mirror. Rivas's reflection tiny in the chrome of a diner napkin holder. Every angle corrected, every error used as a shield. At the center, Malcolm's back as he stood at a grave marker that read Carter. Taken from high ground, the frame cut by a tree limb like a black slash. Jesus, he said, not praying. Pinned below, a single Polaroid, new enough to smell like Fixer, the drive-in's white screen from the base of the field. In the bottom border, a clean slice scraped by something sharp, dragging a curl of paper away. Rivas touched it and felt a tiny ridge. Not random, deliberate. She pulled a jeweler's loop from her pocket and ran the border under it. The scrape had pauses, 5 short, 2 long, 1 short. A rhythm. Notches like Morse, notched in the soft lip where cameras usually press their branded edge code. She wrote the pattern on her palm. You're hearing things again, Malcolm said, but he sounded like a man who heard them too. They took the Polaroid to the truck and laid the code against a chart. 5 shorts, 2 longs, 1 short. Not letters, numbers. If longs stood for breaks, shorts for counts. 5, 2, 1. A coordinate fragment? 5, 2, 1 degrees? Nonsense. But numbers like photos don't sit alone. They need neighbors. Rivas pulled the truck note, the motel note, the storage unit scribble. In the margins of 2, there were almost invisible ticks, ballpoint indents from a hand that pressed too hard. 521793. She arranged them until they started to look like a familiar sort of map, the way local hunters mark blinds along a lake on a napkin. 521 northing, 793 easting, if you grew up with a county grid and not GPS. She overlaid it on the topographical of the salt pan. The numbers fell on a seam between the drive-in and a line of scrub where a drainage ditch had been cut in 1984 and left to fill with tumbleweed and bones. They walked the ditch at night. Wind crawled over the pan, low and patient. The ditch was a black ribbon. Halfway along, the beam of her flashlight snagged on glass. Not bottles, lenses, dozens of them, cheap and old, arranged in a circle like a crown. Inside the ring, a metal ammo box sat in a shallow, carefully scooped grave as if someone had laid it to sleep. The lock had been sawn and rewelded, then painted to look old. Rivas pried it, the lid lifted with a sigh. Inside, a stack of envelopes bound with film leader, a small cassette recorder the size of a pack of gum, and a roll of 35mm film wrapped in foil like contraband candy. She thumbed the recorder. It clicked, whirred, coughed up a voice. Not his. Not the low desert rasp they'd carried like a scar. A woman's voice, soft with exhaustion, scraped raw by smoke, steady in the way that only the very tired manage. If you found this, you're either him or the person I've been leaving the doors open for, the voice said. Either way, you already know what the picture looks like. Static gnawed the edges. The voice returned. He taught me how to stand still. I taught myself how to move. You think the trick is vanishing. It's not. The trick is making them look the wrong way while you set the light. Malcolm swallowed. Lena. The voice did not say its name. It said, everything I ever gave him, I took back. Everything he ever took, I put where you could see it. Not for him, for me, for her. A pause. The kind of silence that holds a whole house in it. Don't try to save a woman who saved herself. Look for the ones who never got the chance. A click, then the recorder chewed and died. Rivas didn't breathe for a count of 5. She lifted the envelopes. Each was labeled in pencil. Tucson, Gallup, Needles, Lordsburg. Inside, Polaroids of rooms just like room 9. Tripods, mirrors, chairs. But here and there, another frame intruded. A torn ID photo, a hand with a ring, a paperback with a name scribbled in the cover. Christina, Marta, June. Not trophies, records, evidence. The distances between the pictures mapped routes nobody had bothered to connect because nobody believed anyone would keep that many ghosts alive in the same pattern. Malcolm's voice came back sandpapered. She's been building our case for us. The film canister rattled. Rivas slipped it into an evidence bag, but her fingers had the itch photographers get when unshot film sits nearby, like a static under skin. She turned the canister in her palm. Someone had scratched numbers into the black plastic with a pin. 34.982, 106.711. Coordinates, the edge of a mesa 2 hours east. They drove with the lights off for a mile before common sense turned them back on. A freight train hauled its spine across the desert to their left, horn blowing at crossings that didn't need warning. The coordinates led to a cut in the rock, a service road, a chain-link fence with a hole coyote high. Words painted on the fence in flaked white, "Keep out." They slipped through. The mesa held the sky up with both hands. In the lee, out of the wind, sat another box, not metal, wood, handmade. The lid was secured by a strip of denim nailed at each end like a blue tourniquet. Rivas levered it open. Inside lay a single photograph turned face down. On the back, a message in slanting left-handed script. "Smile, detective, the last frame is yours." She flipped it. Her throat closed. The picture showed the drive-in from earlier that night, but not from ground level. From above, from the ridge where they had parked. Two figures walked along the ditch, heads bent together, hers and Malcolm's. In the corner, a third shape watched them through brush, hair tied back, face in profile, a scar running pale from temple to jaw. The click had caught the blink between steps, the angle that made every living person look a little like a ghost. The border had fresh notches, a new code. Her pen shook as she copied it down. 5 long, 3 short, 2 long, 1 short. A date if you wanted one, or a time, or just an answer, "Stop chasing me." The train wailed again. The horn rolled down the arroyo like thunder coming from inside the earth. On the far side of the service road, a flash winked once, twice, and went dark. A signal, a warning, a goodbye. Malcolm's phone vibrated. A message with no number, just a gray bubble and a thumbnail image. He opened it and hissed a breath. It was the grave again, Carter, but fresh flowers lay on it now, desert wildflowers the color of bruises. The timestamp put the photo 20 minutes in the past. "She's between us," he said. "Always was." Rivas stared at the wooden box, the denim strap, the scar on the woman's face that matched the bandage from Phoenix, grown old and quiet. The voice in the recorder had not asked for rescue. It had offered a map and a mandate. "Then we turned the camera," she said. "Not at her, at the roads she walked. Every stop, every room, every girl whose name he erased. We build the case she started." The wind shifted, sage and dust. A smell like rain where there was no rain. In the black shape of the mesa, for the width of a blink, another shape moved, small and certain, the way a person moves who has learned how to live without being seen. "Lena," Malcolm said into the night, a prayer that didn't expect an answer. The night answered anyway, not with a voice, but with a sound Rivas felt before she heard. The tiny, hungry click of a shutter somewhere just beyond the fence, set to capture 2 detectives who had finally turned to face the right way. Morning came on like a slow exposure, light leaking into the frame, details resolving grain by grain. Rivas didn't sleep. Malcolm slept in the way old cops do, eyes open, hand near a phone that doesn't always ring. When the sun scraped the mesa's rim, she was already making calls, turning the single voice in that little recorder into a mandate with a budget line. A task force has a sound, printers humming, coffee burning, the thrum of too many lives all braided into one deadline. They named it what it was because names matter. Project Haven. Not for him, for the rooms, for the girls who sat in them and learned to hold their breath like a profession. The board filled and refilled. Maps, pins, strings, not red yarn, not here. Thin white thread that disappeared in bright light and came back in shadow, the way roots do when you aren't the one walking them. They didn't make a shrine. They made a topology. Tucson, Gallup, Needles, Lordsburg, the drive-in, the salt pan seam, and then the little domestic gravities that pull any traveler, truck stops with decent coffee, motels with a door you can see the car from, grocery stores that take cash and never look long enough at a face to learn it. They brought in a geographer who spoke about drift and habit and the math of desperation. He drew circles that wobbled like breath around each site and said, "The shape of a life lies in its errands." They brought in a forensic genealogist who could read in a cheek swab the ghost of a county 3 states over. They brought in a victim specialist who didn't write on the board at all. She wrote on pieces of paper she folded into squares and slid into her pocket like prayers. Malcolm stood back and watched it grow and felt something like weather change in his bones. The envelopes from the ammo box became chapters. In Gallup, they found the motel long since boarded, the owner dead, the records in a plastic tote in his daughter's garage, room assignments written by hand. One night in 2000, the ledger ink broke. One name entered, then struck out so hard the paper had torn. Christina F. Next to it, a room reassignment. June B. 2 women, 1 room, 1 key. No checkout time recorded. In Tucson, they found a photo in a pawn shop. Cheap frame, sun-faded matte. The subject, a payphone with a shadow leaning over it, the angle wrong for day. In the corner, half-cropped, a bracelet with a tiny saint medal, the kind Lena's mother used to sell at the church bazaar. The pawn ticket said the photo came in with a box of randoms 10 years back, dropped by a woman who wouldn't give a name, but paid cash for a new strap on a Minolta and a can of Fixer like she knew what she was doing. In Needles, the motel had been bulldozed, but the concrete pad remembered. Under rebar and weeds, metal pinged. They dug up a film drying rack, the kind that holds negatives like ribs, clipped to one hook, a segment of film, blank to the eye, until you tilted it just so and saw a song of scratches along the edge, the same little code pressed into the Part 6 Polaroids. Look here, not there. A language taught by necessity, a code you only learn if you are living against a clock. They stopped saying victims in the briefing room. They started saying women. It changes the shape of a sentence. The case got warmer not because of blood, but because the frame widened, because the camera turned the way the voice had told them to. And the case got meaner because every new name arrived with a family that had learned to go years without sleep. At noon the third day, the genealogist walked in with a paper trembling in her hand, the way paper does when it carries too much. June. From the envelopes, there was a match. A partial cousin hit through a DNA file uploaded by a woman in Bakersfield who'd spit in a tube to find out whether the woman who raised her was actually her aunt. She was. Her mother, June B., had vanished in 2001 near a motel outside Barstow. The cousin's grandmother kept a box of things, a notebook, an earring, a photo of June in a jean jacket with an indigo that went violet in certain light. The denim, the hand-dyed batch, a boutique run out of a flea market stall by a traveler who would show up for 2 weekends and then leave. The receipts were cash, but the stall registration listed a name, E. Carter. Malcolm exhaled like a tire. She was there with her, with June, not just a witness, present. Maybe after, maybe before. Rivas didn't romanticize it. Survivors live near other survivors. Sometimes they carry each other, sometimes they drag, sometimes they become what they had to become to outlive a man with a camera. Phone calls multiplied. In Barstow, a woman who once ran a housekeeping crew said she remembered 2 women traveling together 20 years ago, one with a scar by her temple, one who kept her face turned away from mirrors. They were polite. The word landed like a bruise. Left the room cleaner than they found it. Wiped the glass with lemon-scented, like they were ashamed of fingerprints. At the drive-in site, county workers found another box after a grader's blade kissed metal and squealed. This one wasn't for Rivas. It was marked with a child's handwriting, uneven, stubborn, for Mom. Inside were copies of letters never sent, all in Lena's left hand, to a woman in a care home who would die while the desert still rehearsed its same hot sentence each day. "I am not dead," one letter said without greeting or farewell. "I will not be the picture he took of me." Another, "If you get this, burn it. If you don't get this, forgive me." None were mailed. All smelled like matches. They gave the letters to the victim specialist, who read them alone, one palm flat on the table, as if to keep the paper from getting up and running in the night. She came out with red around her eyes and said 3 things. Stop using the word escape like it's the end of a sentence. Stop thinking in terms of a single monster. Start making a list of helpers. Helpers. The word sat wrong in the mouth, heavy and necessary. A predator is a fact. A network is a choice. Travis had enablers because men like him always do. People who like discounts on speakers from the back of a pickup. People who look away when a girl sits quiet in a car with the window down on a cold night. People who take cash and don't ask to see an ID that doesn't exist anymore. The denim supplier. The darkroom chemical dealer who never asked why a transient wanted pro-grade stabilizer. The motel clerk who gave a key to a man and never noticed the woman behind him who flinched at light. They were the frame, and frames hold pictures up. They didn't arrest a single one of them that week. Sometimes justice begins as a ledger, names on a list, dots on a map, a powder kept dry. The DA wanted a body and a headline. Rivas wanted a door that wouldn't close on the next woman who needed it to stay open. A door did open, but not the kind you can knock on. Midweek, rain, actual rain, crossed the basin and hit the salt pan in a single sheet that turned dust to glass. The drive-in's white screen gleamed like bone cleaned by vultures. On that white, as the storm passed, words appeared in faint gray, like a projection without a bulb. Rivas thought she was tired enough to see things. Malcolm didn't. He reached into the truck bed, pulled out a polarization filter from a kit he swore he'd never use again, and spun it against the light. The letters darkened. Turn the light around. She looked behind her, not at the screen, but at the booth. On the booth's inside wall, tight against the concrete, someone had pasted thin strips of reflective tape long ago. The backsplash of headlights across the field had bounced signal after signal to anyone who knew to look back, not forward. The message was not magic, it was optics. The same lesson 1,000 times. Orient the light to see the thing that refuses to be seen. They angled the truck, killed the engine, let the sun take over where the storm left off. The booth wall resolved into a grid of tape the shape of a county. Little mirror squares marking roads. One square, near a mark for an arroyo, was not tape. It was a metal slug glued to the wall. Rivas pried it with a knife. It popped off and rolled into her palm. A flattened bullet casing, .38, polished to a dull shine by a thumb that had worried it for years. In micro scratches along its rim, the now familiar code. She read it, wrote it, mapped it. The arroyo turned into a wash, turned into a culvert under the highway that looked like every culvert in America. Graffiti, condoms, the breath of something living in the dark. It also held a locker, not a safe, not a cache with romance in it. A school locker yanked from a wall, painted beige sometime during Reagan, laid on its back and chained to rebar like a coffin. Inside, 6 driver's licenses, 3 social security cards, 2 library cards, and a stack of 12 by 18 contact sheets of women not Lena, not June, not Christina, others, too many. On the back of each contact sheet, written with a carpenter's pencil, where I saw her last. Under that cities, under that dates, some with X's, some with question marks. The handwriting had Lena's left-handed lean, but interleaved were other notes in other hands. A clerk's spiky print, paid cash, no address. A cop's block, we told her to call tomorrow. A shelter worker's careful cursive, she never came back, we hope she found her way. Hope is a fragile kind of malpractice. It breaks clean and leaves no blood to photograph. News found them anyway. A drone with a station logo pivoted over the salt pan like a fly that loved tragedy. The DA went on at 6 with better hair than facts. Break in the 98 Dry Creek case, the Chiron promised, because it is easier to sell answers than to sit with hard questions. The phone at the task force desk lit up like a switchboard in a war movie. Everyone had seen something. Everyone had a white Camaro in their memory. Everyone wanted to be the one who picked the right thread out of the old rug and pulled. The call that mattered didn't come to the desk. It came to Malcolm's old badge number, the one that still worked on some dusty card. A woman's voice, calm, pitched to slice through noise but not leave a mark. Your drive-in is too obvious, she said. Turn left at the windmill with one blade missing. Park before the Dry Creek bed. Walk until you can't hear the highway. You'll know the place when you stop wanting to be there. The line died. He didn't ask how she had the number. He didn't ask why she trusted him again after he'd failed to answer 23 years ago, after his town had turned a scream into a rumor. He just wrote the words, one blade missing, and looked out at a horizon full of windmills that had been trying to teach them directions since before either of them were born. They found it at dusk, because some places only reveal themselves when light gets honest. The windmill leaned, one arm amputated by rust. The creek bed gaped like a healed wound. They killed the truck and walked. The highway sound thinned, then went to thread, then nothing. In the nothing, the ground felt soft underfoot, like memory. In the soft, a shape. A small chapel with no denomination, 4 walls of fieldstone roofed with corrugated tin. The door unlatched. The inside, cool as if the desert had remembered night just for this room. The altar was a table. On it, a scatter of things that towns call effects and people call what was left. Hair ties, a plastic St. Jude, a library card snapped in half, a Polaroid camera with its back exploded by heat, a key with LC scratched into it by a pocket knife. Behind the table, a photo booth curtain hung from a wire, one of those old strips you feed quarters to for 4 frames of summer. Rivas parted it with 2 fingers. The little bench was there. So was the coin slot, jammed open with a dime. Above the lens, taped carefully, a note. Not a taunt, not a map. A sentence written without theater. If you sit here, do not ask me to come out. Sit here to say, I see you walked yourself out. The pen stroke fell and rose like a pulse, steady now, learned, no shaking, no plea. Malcolm sat first, because ghosts recognize each other. He didn't speak. He put a quarter on the shelf and didn't push it in. He simply looked at the lens and counted under his breath the way he used to count steps in Lena's kitchen. When he finished, the box snapped once. A shutter reflex, maybe. Or mercy. Rivas sat next. She didn't count. She let the silence have its turn. She didn't ask for anything. She did what the note told her. Acknowledged the road, the shoulders it had required. When she stood, the little booth hummed like a sleeping animal. 2 strips slid out into the tray, both blank to the eye, But if you tilted them, one frame held a ghost of movement, just enough to know a woman had been there a minute earlier, the corner of a jaw, the line of a scar. If you looked harder, it vanished. If you relaxed your eyes and let the light do the work, you could almost see her smile, not for the camera, not for him, not for them, for herself. They didn't take the booth. They didn't bag the altar. Some rooms are evidence, some rooms are graves. This was neither. This was a place someone made so other people could come sit down their weight without being asked to provide a story on demand. They photographed it and left it as they found it. Door latched, windmill clicking, the creek bed waiting for a rain that would not come. Back at the board, the white threads looked different. Less like hunting, more like a set of exits. They moved the center pin from Dry Creek, from the house with the sliced screen and the coffee mug ring, to a point not on any map. A location made of sentence, where you turn the light around. The DA wanted press, the task force wanted warrants, the families wanted names on doors that had only ever had numbers. Malcolm wanted one thing he would not get, a knock at his porch, and a woman walking up the steps with a dog he remembered. Rivas wanted the camera that was still out there, somewhere, taking pictures of her through chrome and glass and night. It came in the mail, because some things still do. No return address, no postmark, hand-carried, slipped into the slot of a station that had forgotten to oil its hinges. Inside, one Polaroid. The grave again, Carter, with the flowers now gone to seed. In the corner, just barely inside the frame, the toe of a boot that had stepped forward and then thought better of it. On the white border, not a code but a single line in left-handed script. The loops on the Y low and closed, the ink pressed with enough control to leave the paper unbroken. You found the others. That was the point. Underneath, smaller, thank you for not asking the wrong question. Rivas turned it and looked at the back. Clean, no tricks, no coordinates, no demand to keep chasing. Outside, the wind shifted and sent dust down the street in a ribbon thin as film. Somewhere in it, a shutter clicked, the automatic door of a grocery, the hinge of a school, a camera that would never again be pointed at a mouth asked to smile when there was nothing to smile about. Somewhere else, a woman folded a piece of paper into a smaller square and put it in her pocket and walked away without leaving a footprint anyone could read. The board stayed up. The list of helpers grew teeth. Arrests would happen, slow as civil dawn. Headlines would thin once the story got complicated enough to be true. But in the room with the humming printers, one line now sat underlined twice in Rivas's hand. Do not make her survival our plot. Make it their record. Thunder never did come that week. The sky held and held. The desert did what it always does. Kept the dead differently. Kept the living differently, too. At midnight, the drive-in screen went gray. It wasn't rain. It was fog, the one night a year the basin breathes. The booth light stuttered once like a blink in a dark theater. And across the flat, for those who had learned how to turn, a message wrote itself where no one could photograph it. Not words, not code, just the simple geometry of two people standing side by side, looking the right way at last. The arrests didn't start with sirens. They started with ink. Subpoenas slid across counters where no one had looked up from a crossword in 20 years. Grand jury invitations arrived like wedding RSVPs with a different kind of RSVP implied. The list of helpers turned into a calendar, the calendar into a route. Rivas didn't hunt, she audited. She walked into businesses that smelled like dust and ethics and asked for receipts, manifests, the paper trail that keeps the world running even when the people in it do not. The denim seller at the flea market in Bakersfield thought he had chosen a harmless trade. Vats of indigo under a shade tarp, a smile that said, artisanal and cash only. He remembered June because June had hands that knew how to wring cloth without bruising it. He also remembered the man who stood a step behind her, always one step, always quiet. He called him Tommy. When the warrant reached under his table and came up with a ledger bound in duct tape, the pages told an older story, dates that aligned with motel check-ins, a notation, EVR, next to cash sales made to E. Carter. Evening run, he muttered when asked. We stayed open late for her. She didn't like sunlight. The chemical supplier in Albuquerque had a better lawyer and a worse conscience. He had sold pro-grade stabilizer to a man with a trembling voice. Photographer, the man had said. Desert light, he'd added like a password. He never asked to see a card because he did not want to learn the name that would live in his head forever. He sold developer by the gallon and slept fine, until now. When he signed the deposition, his hand shook once. He said he was sorry the way people say it about rain. The pawn shop in Tucson turned over cameras with serial numbers that matched frames from the Santa Fe storage unit. The owner had advertised, no questions asked, and he meant it. The phrase lived under the glass with the rings and the regrets. He used it like a shield. It kept him from recognizing that a policy can be a knife. They took his security tapes and found nothing. The lens had been hung crooked since 2009. He'd never fixed it because crooked had always been good enough. They found one man who had driven. He told himself he was only giving rides. That gas money and a story about my cousin stuck at a motel didn't add up to sin. He confessed like a man chopping wood, each word a blow he believed would eventually split the log. I figured she wanted to be where she was, he said about a woman in the passenger seat who did not speak because not speaking was the safest way to stay alive. She never asked for help. The victim specialist looked at him for a long, quiet 15 seconds and then told him what the law would call his courage. He cried because the word was heavier than what he had lifted. Malcolm watched the ledger grow resolve. He didn't love it. He didn't hate it. He was simply old enough to understand that justice, when it comes, is often beige. But beige can build a cell. Beige can hold a door closed. Every day, someone called to demand the one story that fits on television. Was Lena alive or wasn't she? Did she forgive or didn't she? Would she come to court and bless the narrative with her face? Rivas kept a piece of paper taped to her monitor where she could see it before she answered anything. Do not make her survival our plot. Make it their record. She read it like a psalm and then said things like, "We're not going to speak to that. There are other women who did not get to choose. The case is bigger than one name." She said these things until the words tasted less like media training and more like bone. Then a boy with a drone found an unmarked patch of disturbed ground 3 miles from the drive-in near a clump of tamarisk where nothing should have grown. The drone footage fluttered like a heartbeat over dirt that had been patted and combed. The boy, smart enough to be scared of his discovery, sent it to the tip line instead of his channel. Rivas went out before the county could pave the truth with curiosity. She knelt and touched the soil. It had set like bread. When the shovel broke the crust, the smell rose thin and bitter. Not death. Photochemicals, old and tired, leaching out of buried trays. The trench held a dark room, not a romantic one. No enlarger, no red light, just the skeletal remains of tables, glass, and habit. And in one corner, a mason jar, half full of coins, quarters mostly, all dated 1998, 2001, some blackened, some bright. Someone had been paying for time. The jar had a paper label melted into it. The glue had encoded lines where letters used to be. She held it to the sun and saw the ghost smile. They found a camera under the table. Minolta body, shutter fused. Inside, a roll half shot and then rewound, a habit born of fear. Never finish a roll in one place. Never leave your whole story on a single strip if you might have to run. The lab unspooled the emulsion with the patience of saints. The images came up like bruises. A mirror, a hand untaping its own mouth. A lampshade cut into a crown of triangles to throw jagged light. The last frame was pure white, overexposed to the point of violence. The white held a smear that might have been a face if you wanted it. Rivas didn't. She wanted the bulb sockets, the angle of the cord, the type of gaffer tape. Each detail told her the thing she already knew. This was not how a captor photographs control. This was how a survivor rehearses exit. The DA pressed. "We need a trial star," he said in a meeting that smelled like recycled air and ambition. "The public is hungry for resolution." He spoke as if hunger were a virtue. Rivas flattened her palm on the table. "The public's appetite is not evidence," she said. "We are not going to subpoena a woman for surviving." The room split into those who flinched and those who leaned forward. Malcolm sat back and said nothing because he'd learned that the quietest officer in a room full of heat is also the one writing the report that lasts. The enablers pled, some fast, some slow. The denim seller flipped for probation, the chemical man for a fine that would not hurt enough. The driver will do time because the law knows what a wheel can accomplish. The pawnshop owner donated to a fund for missing women, as if money were an apology that could be folded into thirds and mailed. None of it felt like thunder. It felt like paperwork. Sometimes paperwork is how you keep monsters from inheriting. At midnight, a week later, the chapel door that had been left latched swung inward on a wind that hadn't risen. No footprints came or went. The coin tray spat a strip, not a blank one this time. 4 frames of the booth curtain with a shadow behind it. The shadow's head was turned away. In the 3rd frame, the hands came up and tied the curtain open with a hair tie, a small domestic gesture that said, "This is not a stage." In the 4th, light hit the lens at an angle that would have whited out the face of anyone who wanted to be seen. The strip lay there in the quiet till morning. A coyote nosed it and thought better. A letter reached the task force in an envelope that lived a little too long in a pocket. Sweat halo, corner softened by the rhythm of steps. No return address. Inside, a map of Texas printed from a library computer, edges ragged from tearing. A line walked from Dry Creek to Abilene to Amarillo, and then off the page into white. On the white, a sentence in left-hand script. "You keep looking for a door. Start counting windows." The W's dipped low, the muscle memory of a woman who has written window often enough to build shelters out of them. They took the advice. Windows are checks on a story, where a clerk could see a car all night without headlights, where a neighbor could watch a stranger lean, where a girl in a passenger seat could imagine for the length of a red light what it would take to roll. They re-interviewed, not with the question, what did you see that night, but what did your window know week after week? They found 2 women in Lordsburg who had watched a white car idle on hot afternoons while a man adjusted his mirrors and a girl in the seat beside him counted telephone poles under her breath. They found a cashier who had remembered a pair of hands buying bandages and lemons because the list felt like a prayer someone says when they mean, I need to keep the skin from scarring the wrong way. They found a janitor who had cleaned a motel hallway and thrown away 3 Polaroids because they gave him a feeling he could not name. He cried when he told them. I would have kept them if I'd known. You didn't know, the victim specialist said, not to absolve but to accept physics. Light travels forward, sometimes we do not. The presses kept thundering. Breakthrough in cold case, the chyron roared and then quieted when the breakthrough turned out to be a theory of windows in a chapel that refused to perform grief on cue. Online, avatars demanded faces. Real life answered with paperwork and locks. It wasn't nothing. It wasn't enough. The families of women in the contact sheets came to the boardroom and touched names like you touch a stove to make sure the burn you remember really happened. One mother asked the question no one had allowed to breathe. Why didn't she come home? No accusation in it, only gravity. Rivas didn't answer with a slogan. She said, because home wasn't safe then, because fear can be a North Star, because sometimes not dying takes all of a person's life for a while. The mother nodded. Then make here safe now, she said. Make now count. The project's mandate sharpened like a knife on a stone. Prosecutions, yes, but shelters too, rent vouchers, a pilot program for motel clerks who want a script for what to do when a woman pays cash for a room and answers every question with her eyes. Beige justice, brick by brick mercy. A week later, the chapel door had another visitor. A teenager with a skateboard and a bleeding elbow wandered in to rinse the grit off. He came out with a Polaroid because the booth had decided he needed one. The strip showed him scowling in frame 1, laughing in frame 2, and in frame 3, he had turned, instinctively it seemed, toward the curtain. There, for a sliver, a geometry, a scar, a mouth that had learned not to say smile. He took the photos home and tacked them to a corkboard because the world is still, sometimes, a place where kids make altars by accident. Late that night, Malcolm drove the county roads and let the radio find static. He passed the old diner, now a taco stand, neon soft, grease turned to cilantro. He stopped where he had counted scuffs in a kitchen lit by lightning. He said her name again, softer each time, until it wasn't a request, but a recognition. On his porch, when he finally parked, he found a dog asleep in the shadow. Not Chester. Dogs die. The universe is not sentimental, but this dog lifted his head and looked at him and then put his chin back down like a photograph being slid into a stack where it belonged. He sat beside the dog and didn't reach to touch because he had learned something about consent a long, slow way. After a while, the dog leaned his weight into his boot. That was enough. The phone buzzed. A message, no number, a photo, a laundromat at dawn, rows of windows throwing gold onto an empty lot, a woman's shadow bent over a basket. The caption, if you could call it that, was 4 words. Counted, turned, still here. Rivas saw it too, across town. She stood at her own window and counted back. Not years, but frames. The fair, the Camaro, the river, the storage unit wall, the motel's black hallway, the drive-in's white tooth, the ditch's crown of lenses, the chapel's note. The case hadn't closed. Cases like this don't. They evolve into a way a place holds itself. The storm the weatherman kept promising finally came at 3 in the morning. Rain hit the salt pan and did not boil off. For a minute, the desert pretended it was a lake again. If you stood just right, turned just so, the water became a mirror big enough to hold a sky and somewhere in the reflection, a person walking away without vanishing. Not a ghost, not a headline. A woman in a jacket dyed indigo that went violet under the streetlights, moving with the patience of someone who had learned to light her own road. The storm broke the way old habits break, suddenly and after years of warning. Streets steamed. The salt pan turned to a mirror that remembered sky. Dry Creek woke to gutters that sang, and a radio voice that kept saying the same word until meaning fell off it. Flood. In the task force room, printers hiccuped, then settled into their measured hymn. Project Haven kept time with the rain. Rivas ran on coffee and a list. Warrants had teeth now, not the DA's headlines. Beige teeth, ledger teeth, the kind that chew quietly through varnish. The denim man had flipped. The chemical supplier had named a second, smaller shop that sold fixer out the back for cash. The driver was writing a letter to the families he would never meet because guilt, when it finally chooses a hand, writes in block letters and does not sign. What the list didn't have was a center. Headlines want a villain at the top of the pyramid, but the map on the wall looked more like weather, a pressure system, a set of currents moving in the same direction because the shape of the land demanded it. Travis was dead. The helpers were waking up in the harsh light of depositions. The women were lines that had left. The community, if you could call something that large by such an intimate name, was figuring out how to put up windows you could climb through without setting off an alarm. Before noon, a deputy walked a package to the desk. Hand-delivered, no postmark, damp at the corners like it had stood in the rain and waited to be noticed. Inside, a cheap transistor radio, plastic yellow gone to nicotine. Taped to its side, a note, tuned to 88.1 after dark. Bring no one who wants a photograph. The handwriting slanted left, loops on the Y's closed, pressure even. Learned, not natural. Rivas ran her thumb along the paper and felt the steadiness. Healing costs discipline. Malcolm turned the radio over. The battery compartment had been taped. Inside, instead of batteries, 2 rolls of quarters. 1998, 2001, mostly. The coin faces looked up with the calm of saints who don't interfere. He looked at Rivas. She looked back, and the room around them became what rooms become when the next sentence will rearrange them. They went at dark, of course. The drive-in peeled itself out of the night like a tooth. The basin breathed fog the way a chest breathes sleep. Rivas put the radio on the truck bed and spun the dial until static softened and a hum rose. Low, like a heart behind a wall. Then a voice, the one from the cassette, smoke-scraped, steady, not interested in theater. If you can hear me, the voice said, you learned the trick. I'm not a ghost. I am where the light isn't. The FM band carried the words with that thin drive-in echo, the kind you feel in your teeth. I can't come stand in your frame, the voice went on. Frames do what he did. They cut. They keep. They turn a person into evidence, and evidence into a story that belongs to someone else. You already have what matters. You have rooms and keys and names that were supposed to be lost. Keep those. Let me keep my walking. Malcolm had one hand on the truck rail. He did not realize he was holding it as if bracing for a photograph. The voice didn't address him. It addressed geography. Dry Creek, you heard a sound once and decided what it meant. You were almost right. You are closer now. Don't tell the next girl what her scream is for. Silence. Not dead air. A pause chosen on purpose. You asked the wrong question for 23 years, the voice said. You asked who took her. Ask who opened the door. Ask who taught her to hinge it quietly. You will find them at laundromats and church basements and in motel housekeeping crews whose paychecks say temporary. They have key rings heavier than ours. They have no lines in the paper. They are why I did not die before I learned how not to. A click in the speaker, papers shuffling, the sound of someone moving in a chair that does not belong to them and never did. There is a place you'll want to dig, the voice said, matter of fact. Don't. It is not a grave. It is where I practiced leaving. It is only holes and rope and a broken tripod leg. If you steal the practice from the next one, you will have done what he did, turned a room into proof, when it was a room for breath. Leave it. Count windows instead. The frequency fuzzed, then cleared. Another voice stepped through, not a recording, not a ghost, alive and today and careful. This is June, it said. The room at the board snapped taut like a string plucked by a name. Not the name I use now. Enough. I'm not here to perform. I called this number a beep, a cut tone, 555, for the families who never got an apology. You will not get one from him. You will not get one from the sand. Here is mine. I could not go back for your daughter. I could only leave for mine. A breath. I am still leaving. It takes a while. I am 23 years into leaving. I am getting good at it. Static, then the first voice again. The radio will play this twice. After that, let it die. Do not turn it into a fundraiser. Do not name it. If you must call it something, call it instructions. The transmission looped, as promised, and ended with a hiss like rain. Rivas clicked the dial off. The night did what it always does, kept being night. So, Malcolm said softly, now what? We do the boring work, Rivas said, and the holy kind. They did both. The boring work looked like spreadsheets with columns named window sightline and cash-only refills, and unrecorded third-shift clerk. It looked like a dozen motel owners learning the phrase, soft refusal. The script for, I can't give you that room number, but I can call and ask if she'd like me to pass along a phone. It looked like swapping a burned-out porch light for a motion sensor that came on when a person approached and did not punish them for breathing. Beige miracles, stapled to policies that would outlive everyone in the room. The holy work looked like a bus ticket bought with a gift card that left no bank trace. A phone drop at the chapel, inside a Bible taped to the underside of the bench with the kind of careful that cannot be taught in a seminar. It looked like a box of denim left on a stoop with a note. If you dye it yourself, the color will hold. Some days it looked like a policeman not asking a question he had been waiting his whole life to ask. Other days it looked like a detective doing dishes with a woman who would not tell her last name, but would tell her what brand of lemon oil takes fingerprints off glass without leaving a streak. The DA held a press conference because weather only bumps the 6 o'clock when the flood eats a car. Progress, the chyron said, and under it the faces of men who had answered the wrong questions for money and women who had stopped narrating their own pain. The comments were what comments are. The world kept doing what it does when you rub your fingers together and demand it make a violin. The boy with the drone brought back more footage and a question like a dog he didn't know what to do with. On the edge of the basin, where the water had pooled, someone had arranged lenses, cheap, scratched, hundreds, into a long S-curve that caught dawn and threw it at the booth wall. From above, the curve looked like a river deciding to talk again. In the middle of it, a small wooden post stuck up with a tin tag wired on. The tag said mercy in letters punched by a hand that had practiced the distance between strength and tenderness. "You want us to pull them?" he asked, meaning the lenses, meaning the art that wasn't art. "Leave them," Rivas said. "Mirrors are not evidence, they are tools." The helpers kept falling under paper weight. A former clerk remembered the night she slid 2 keys by accident and how the accident had been instructional: 2 doors, 2 women, 1 plan. The driver testified to a pickup behind the truck stop where a man learned a lesson he did not expect, that the person in the passenger seat was practicing not being there right then while he thought he was pumping gas. The chemical man brought a ledger he had not been asked for and put his name under it as if penance could be notarized. One afternoon, when the printer stalled and the room breathed at last, the victim specialist taped a single line of paper over the board. The opposite of taken is not returned. The opposite of taken is let go. No one argued. The sentence moved the pins all by itself. At sundown, a sheriff's cruiser rolled to a stop by Malcolm's porch. The young deputy climbed out like the ground might shift under him and handed over an evidence bag with 2 items, a cassette tape and a Polaroid. The tape had no label. The photo showed the taco stand that used to be the diner, neon washed into a halo by real rain. Through the window, the silhouette of a waitress, gray hair now, still keeping notes, handing a coffee over a counter to a figure we could argue about forever. Scar glint, jawline, a jacket dyed indigo that went violet when the light fell right. The caption wasn't written, it happened, in the way the lens had caught the exchange. Hospitality, small and without witness. The tape was Lena again, or the voice we have decided belongs to her. "If you need proof," she said, "ask the dog. He knows I stopped at the porch. He knows I did not stay. Don't turn the dog into a shrine. Pet him if he asks." A soft laugh. "Hello, Chester, that is not Chester." Malcolm looked up at the dog asleep under his chair, as if the universe had just slipped him a joke to carry to his grave. The dog thumped his tail once against the plank. That was the whole theology. Night laid back down. Rivas drove the circuit, the car a moving window through which America kept happening. Laundromats, clinics, motels promising color TV, a church sign that said, "Love isn't a camera." At the chapel, the booth spat a strip without being asked, 4 frames of an empty bench. In the second, a corner of paper fluttered into view, and then out again, as if a hand had thought better. In the fourth, the curtain was tied back with a hair tie the color of river mud. On the drive home, the radio wandered and found a country song that had been playing in that kitchen in 1998, the one that turned grief into a chorus. Rivas let it play without irony. The highway is a machine that turns old into now with enough miles. She thought about windows and quarters and women who tape Bibles to bench undersides because they understand the difference between evidence and exit. When she turned on her street, her phone lit the cab. A message. No number, no image this time. Just a sentence that didn't need a voice to be hers. Counted, turned, still walking. Rivas didn't reply. The story didn't need her half. She parked, she sat, she let the rain tick the roof down to silence. Somewhere on the pan, a line of lenses took the first light of morning and mailed it to the booth wall without a return address. Somewhere between a laundromat and an arrow of highway heat, a woman adjusted a jacket, felt the weight of a small radio in her pocket, and decided not to listen tonight.